From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV, the Kresge Foundation.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us for Detroit Public TV's coverage of the 2023 Mackinac Policy Conference. I am Zoe Clark. It is a full day here at the beautiful Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. This morning, Liz Cheney gives us her insights on national politics and how that translates for Michiganders. Later, a session looking at electrification and how business and consumers can be better aligned. And this afternoon, Governor Whitmer gives her keynote address. Yesterday, I sat down with Dave Blaskowitz from Invest Detroit to discuss how venture capitalism is impacting business in the city of Detroit.
Dave Blaskowitz, President and CEO of Invest Detroit, is here. Hello, Dave.
Well, hello.
How are you?
Fantastic, thanks.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So a new report says Michigan is lagging other states in funding for entrepreneurs and startups. Tell me about the new report.
Yeah, new report out showing that we are lagging our surrounding states with respect to investing in our early stage companies. It's such an important part of our economy.
What does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis, right? Like we can say we're lagging,
yes.
But what do the metrics look like? What does that mean?
Let's compare ourselves to Ohio as an example.
Oh, all right, if we have to.
So Ohio, over the last 5 years, has invested $221 million in their startups, in the early stage companies. And what that's resulted in is $10 billion of revenue to the state. We, on the other hand, have seen a 40% decline in that same time frame for our startups and entrepreneurs. The source of funding for those very early stage, I mean, these are high-risk, startups. The source of funding for those are really limited sources. We have the philanthropic community that will contribute some capital to those startups, but the majority of the funding comes from the public sector, and that's what we're really hoping this report encourages additional investment at the top of the funnel at the early stages of these companies.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about what exactly the ask is, but I just sort of blown away by this number, 40% decline.
That's right.
How did that happen?
It's been a steady decline over the last couple of decades. But it's really been accelerated over the last 10 years. And it's just, there have been other state priorities, and we've watched the allocation to this space go down. The challenge here is that these types of companies, these very early stage companies, need lots of support. That capital is one of the things that puts fuel in their tank that allows them to grow and seed themselves. And of course, we want to keep those companies here in the state of Michigan, and so we've got to provide a series of different sources of capital to allow those companies to grow and really stay here in the state.
Okay, so that's the foundation. So what's the ask?
The ask is for us to put money into funds so that we can create essentially an evergreen situation. We want to be able to take investments into this space and continue to build and grow those companies. But if we can get our base large enough, if we can get that investment to a level for a series of entities to continue to make those contributions, we can do this on a kind of perpetual motion machine. We can get the base large enough so that the returns on that portfolio will begin to fund future investments in those companies. Right now, what we're doing is going back and forth with the state. Every couple of years, we have to reload, these funds, make those new investments. If we can get these to a large enough size, we don't have to do that. And the state becomes the beneficiary of that investment in the long run, and they don't have to contribute additional dollars into that space. So the reason why, the $126 million sounds like a lot of money, but it's really 4 different organizations, entities that are making these investments and building their own evergreen funds so that we can continue to make these investments long into the future without having to, put our hands out and ask for additional support and funding.
Are you making any suggestions about where the money should come from?
This is a specific request to the state. We've watched the state put significant money into large companies and manufacturing facilities. I think the total is around $3.6 billion that went into programs like SOAR.
Yeah.
We would just like to see some investment, some additional investment
Yeah.
on the smaller side. If you think about small businesses across the state, 50% of our employment, is through small businesses.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we are building the capacity of that space, that we are building the number of small businesses that we have. The only way to do that is to start in the beginning with the very early stage companies and then help grow them and keep them here. We are losing companies, even the ones that we're starting, because we don't have that capital to move them along. One example of that would be Bonza Pasta. These guys are making chickpea pasta. Don't know if you've had that or not, Zoe, but delicious stuff. Company started here in Michigan, couldn't find the additional capital that they needed, ended up moving to New York. 80 employees, within that company. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to keep here.
Yeah. So let's say, whether it's SOAR funding, whether it's general funding, let's say you get that. How does that work then? Are folks asking, applying for it? Who makes the determination?
There's already
How would
a
that work?
great coalition that's been pulled together between universities and other like organizations like ours that are investing this capital in early stage companies. And the way that would work is this consortium would, it's already kind of framed up how the dollars would get employed, would be the, kind of sources for providing this capital to early stage companies going forward.
Give me a quick example. Chickpea pasta.
Yes.
Love. What other companies, businesses do you think could really scale up if they were able to be awarded some of this startup money?
So just looking at our portfolio,
Please.
we've invested. We've been doing this for about 13 years now. We've invested in about 200 companies, have about 115 companies in our current active portfolio. These companies are everything from technology companies, medical device companies, therapeutics, you name it. We're trying to support it. So not a lot of specificity, like we're going after this particular market, we're going after battery companies, or going, this is about supporting businesses in this state and helping to keep them here by providing them with the tools and resources that they
Sounds
need.
a little bit like a holistic approach to businesses, right?
Well, we really need that. The other part of this is, it really is kind of a three-legged stool.
Yeah.
We have to provide capital. That's only a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
We also have to provide technical assistance. How we, kind of surround these companies with love is really important. How we give them the support that they need to grow and develop, the network and connection, points are really important. But so is the professional support for those companies. The backroom activities, finance, accounting, and the like are important. But so are markets and creating connections to other businesses and companies in the state.
Well, Dave, we've got about 30 seconds left, but let me ask you, what's your feeling? Is this something you can make happen, and how is the conference going to help that?
If you're going to ask me that, I'm going to always tell you the answer is yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
We're very, kind of optimistic about the state supporting entrepreneurs, and we're very hopeful that they're going to do that in an evergreen fashion.
Yeah.
Again, it's our opportunity to do this once and not have to do this every few years.
Okay.
So.
Dave Blaskowitz, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Major General Darren L. Warner, a seasoned military strategist and influential figure within the United States Armed Forces, is at the forefront of efforts to bolster support for Ukraine. He was here yesterday talking about those efforts and what the future looks like for the U.S. military.
So tell me about the work that TACOM is doing.
So, U.S. Army Tank Automotive and Armaments Command, which we often call TACOM, is responsible for about a $30 billion a year investment by our country in the security of not only our nation, but the world. We support democracies, our allies and partners all around the world. And right now, we are very much involved in working with NATO in supporting what's going on in Europe.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Ukraine. I mean, that is the topic of conversation, it feels right now in our nation when we talk global stability. What is the work that TACOM is doing vis-a-vis what's happening in Ukraine?
So through our foreign military sales program and through a program called the Presidential Drawdown, we're supporting Ukraine with equipment that the United States has that isn't required right now for our defense. It's excess material that is either going to be sold through the foreign military sales program or would be potentially refurbished in the future. We've gone through and provided a significant amount of material to the Department of the Army, Department of Defense, so they know exactly what we have, and we can identify out of that inventory what we can offer up to our allies and partners, either through foreign military sales or, in the case of Ukraine, through presidential drawdown.
That has got to be a really incredible job to be thinking about on any given day what we are sending over. I mean, just the logistics and the preparedness, it seems like. How does that actually work, right, on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, so for us at TACOM, we work hard at understanding and having full knowledge of all the equipment that we have, where it is, and what is its current condition. And we take that knowledge and we apply it to the requests that we get from the Pentagon that asks us to send the best material that we can to Ukraine, whether it's a tank or a Bradley or an artillery piece, whatever the weapon system is. We go through our inventory, we find the best equipment, and if it requires some repair, we'll do some repair on it, and we'll package it up. We don't just provide the equipment, but we also provide training. We provide repair parts, and we provide even technical manuals that we can have translated into a language that's usable with the nation that we're providing the equipment, in this case with Ukraine.
I mean, I'm fascinated by that. I remember hearing about this for the first time last year, right? Of course, it's sending equipment, but a lot of this equipment, again, is not used anywhere else in the world because the U.S. is engineering it and building it. Where does that training take place? What does that look like?
Yeah. So we can train wherever it's appropriate for our ally and partner. So we have foreign military sales going on with many different countries, and we'll do training in the United States for some countries. For other countries, we may do it in one of our partner nations, like in Germany or Poland or another NATO country, where it's easier for our allies or partners to get to. With Ukraine, whatever they need, we take their requests and then we try to support them.
How's Ukraine doing?
So since February of 2022, they've been in a fight with Russia, and they still are fighting and winning. So with the support from around the world, from NATO, from the United States, from allies and partners, they are holding their ground. We hope to see them gain back the territories that were taken from them. We hope to see a peaceful end eventually to this war that's going on. But the future is hard to predict. Our support, the president has declared our support to Ukraine, and we'll continue to support with equipment. And from my point of view, from TACOM, we're going to continue to provide them the equipment that we're directed to provide them.
Ukraine, can feel like it's halfway around the world, because it is. And you turn on the news and you hear about what's happening. Maybe folks are trying to do something to help. What is it like to be so much at the forefront of being helpful? I talk to people who are like, oh, I can Venmo and give this donation. But I mean, what is it like to be so close to the actual process of helping the country?
So it's a great feeling to know that we can contribute in a way to NATO and to Ukraine that is meaningful, that they can provide defense for their families, provide defense for their cities. That's very meaningful. And I know that the 30-some thousand civilians that work inside of TACOM are very positive about providing that support. It's a good way, just like over the years, the United States has always provided a positive result to some of the biggest challenges out there. We haven't always gotten it exactly right, but when we contribute, we're contributing in a way that is a positive. In this case, the defense of Ukraine.
30,000 people doing this work. Give me some examples of what a day in the life may look like.
So we have, within TACOM, we have individuals that do repair work in a factory. They manufacture gun tubes, for example. In one of our arsenals, we manufacture the gun tubes on tanks and howitzers and all sorts of equipment like that. We do all sorts of mill work and welding and all that type of technical trade work at our depots and arsenals around the United States. At TACOM headquarters in Detroit, Detroit Arsenal has the center of gravity for all supply chains for all of our ground systems. So we have item managers who are supply chain specialists who actually will manage a specific group of repair parts from the acquisition, from the contract, all the way through to the distribution to forward units. So it's a really interesting organization. We also have other organizations that do things like, for example, our Foreign Military Sales Directorate. They're responsible for developing the agreements that we have with our allies and partners for equipment that we sell. And then we also do things a little bit out of the norm, which every VFW in the United States, every American Legion that's out in the United States has a arsenal of ceremonial rifles. Those ceremonial rifles that they have that they use, like at this weekend's Memorial Day services, come from TACOM. We provide those to those units. They're hand receipted. They're still on our accounting record. We maintain accountability of them, and we give those rifles to our VFWs and American Legions so they can perform those ceremonies. So we've got a very diverse group of people doing a very diverse group of work.
Doing a lot of work, 30,000 of them. Major General, I so appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And we're now going to go to the session, how Gen Z is changing the game from strategy to policy.
Welcome. Thank you. So, Eva Mello, we're going to start with you. When I was 16, I had just gotten my license, and I was trying not to hit like everything that didn't jump out of my way. When you were 16, you co-founded your own organization.
Right.
Called Black Lives Matter in all capacities. So tell us about the organization and what led you to create it.
Okay, so Black Lives Matter in all capacities is a social justice organization that fights for the liberation of all Black people, but while emphasizing and uplifting the stories and the voices of Black women and girls. My friend and I'm a Russell, we started Black Lives Matter in all capacities in 2020, which seems like such a long time ago now. And at the time, we truly did not expect it to turn into what it was. We planned a protest in June, and things kind of went from there. In July, we heard about this young Black girl, Grace, in Pontiac, Michigan, who was detained for not completing her homework. And that sounds crazy. While everything was virtual, they still decided to detain her because she failed to turn in a few assignments. And when we heard about that, we saw so much of ourselves in Grace, and we knew that this was our time to really step forward and make sure that this young Black girl was going to be protected, because we understand that if nobody else is going to protect us, we will protect each other. And and I, we did a sit-out outside the courthouse where she was sentenced, and when we didn't really get the turnout that we wanted, we knew that we had to escalate things extremely. We did an overnight occupation outside the detention center where she was being detained, and at 16 and 17 years old, that was really scary. And I still don't know how we did it, but the following morning, Grace was released. And we cried, we celebrated, but thank you. But we understood that when Grace being released was only such a small part of this journey. And while Grace represented so many Black girls in this work who have constantly just been never heard of, never talked about, we understood that this was our time to really just look into policy. How can we change things at a systemic level? And that's when we got introduced to Push Out. And if you don't know, Push Out is the criminalization of Black girls within the school system. And that was a word we'd never heard of before, but it was great to just finally have something to describe our experience within the school system. And from there, things have just been kind of going, honestly.
We will talk more about you as a freshman, finishing your freshman year at MSU also. We will get back to that. Imani, you are no stranger to the legislative process. From a very young age, you've testified in front of the state legislature. You have spoken at public forums. You have published op-eds calling for reform to education policy, calling for accountability to public officials. When you met Speaker Tate, you said, I met you when I was 16 on the East Side, remember? So why did you get involved in the first place, and what does that involvement look like for you?
Yeah, so I got involved in advocacy work. I work at right now an education organizing advocacy group, and I got involved with that same organizing group called 482 Forward back when I was 14 years old. My mom was running for school board. My mom used to work for Excellent Schools, and I just always saw my mom fighting for my education. But then something happened in 2015 that I just saw my teachers beginning to sick out. I saw my teachers being told that they couldn't be paid and that they still had to work because that's just what was going on. I saw emergency management just seeming to run a system that I felt like should be run by us, run by people who are experiencing it, run by people who are being impacted by it. So at a very young age, my teacher gave us an assignment: write a letter to your senator. And I wrote a letter to Senator Hansen, and I just really was honest about my experience. I go to the #1 high school in the city of Detroit, and I'm still experiencing all of the same inequities that I see across the rest of the city. No one should be experiencing a lack of teachers. I experienced having a permanent substitute teacher for an entire year in an English class at the #1 high school in Detroit. And so I was just seeing my experience around me and not feeling like it was being reflected in the conversation. And so instead of trying to tell people how I felt on a smaller scale, I wrote my first op-ed, and it went really far. It got published in the Huffington Post. It made it to the Detroit News, and from there I realized that my experience needed to be heard, needed to be shared, because people didn't know what was really going on. So I got involved because of that, and just because I realized how important it is to hear from us. At my organization, we say something, nothing about us without us. There should be no conversations had about me without me in the room. And so that's what I've been fighting for since I was 15 years old. I also helped to found the youth organizing coalition that is a part of 482 Forward now. So all of us were coming to meetings with our parents every week. Finally, we said, why are we not meeting? We're the ones in the classrooms every day. We know what's going on. We should be meeting. We should be protesting. We should be outside. We should be a part of the conversation. And now, I don't know if you guys know that Detroit Public School District actually has a student on their school board. Mm-hmm. That is a direct reflection of the work that I was doing when I was 14 years old. And so when you ask why, that's why. I think that in all conversations, in these conversations, we need to have students a part, because we don't know. Even I don't know. I'm 23 now. I don't know what's happening at Renaissance High School anymore. But they do. So instead of always, listening to what's going on or what you might think is best for us, I think it's just really important that youth have a seat at every table. That's why I got involved, and that's why I stay involved.
Thank you. We're not going to touch the Renaissance High School versus other things.
We won't get there, even though the rivalry is up here. It's up here.
And we're going to talk later about how to keep people here. We are really grateful because Imani left for college at Northwestern, and she just moved back to Michigan. So representing keeping people here. Speaker Tate, so we talked about Gen Z. It's a formidable voting bloc. We talked about 37% of Michigan young people casting ballots in 2022, leading the nation in terms of youth voter turnout. Are legislators waking up to the power of Gen Z and writing legislators? All of that is like very important, but what are the ways that if legislators are hip to what Gen Z is about, then how can they actually integrate them in the policy making process?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you for allowing me to be on the panel this morning. Eva Mello and Monty, thanks for everything that you're doing. I think there is a significant opportunity, for us in the legislature. I mean, we come from a wide range of backgrounds and ages. I think for us, even looking at the caucus's standpoint, as you mentioned, just the large voting block that Gen Z does have, that is somewhat, we're not all the way there yet, but somewhat reflected in our caucus. We have several Gen Z members, too. Some of our youngest are 22 and 23 years old. So I think the work that Gen Z members have been doing and been able to advocate for and getting out to vote is starting to get reflected. But I think there's certainly more, as you mentioned, throughout our process. I think that starts too with individual members really engaging in their districts and in their communities. I mean, we have a proactive member that came over to the east side of Detroit several years ago to talk about, Amani and her experiences, as a student. And we certainly need more of that. And we have more of a way to go in terms of how is that fully reflected? How is Gen Z fully reflected in the lens of public policy making? And there's more that we can do.
That's right. Because they are activated and they are not necessarily beholden to one party. They showed up to vote, but not because they are going to always show up to vote for Democrats. They are going to show up to vote where they see their values and where they see legislators have shown up for them, right? So I want to go down the line and talk about education policy. Let's start with you, Speaker Tate. Will you name a few, one or two education policies that you feel must change?
I think starting first is we need to move towards and figure out how we continue moving in the manner of equitable funding. I think that's incredibly important in terms of what we're doing. When you look at the House passed budget, and we're still in the throes of the budget. I know several members in the audience know this. But you look at the House passed budget, with the work that's being done there. So at-risk funding on the House side, we were able to get to $1 billion there. When you look at special education funding, we were able to get over $2 billion there. I think it points us in the right direction, but I think there's certainly more that we need to do there. And a couple other things, you talk about the proposals around breakfast and lunch. I think you can't start, with, learning and thinking about if your belly's, if you're hungry at the end of the day. And then the third that we're working through as well too is the mental health supports. I mean, on the House side, I mean, we've had about $300 million. We've proposed $300 million and voted that out for mental health services, because we know that that's something that's certainly a gap for our students across the state. But I think first and foremost is how are we ensuring that we have equity in our school aid budget?
Thank you. Eva Mello.
I think one thing I'll touch on is policing. Coming from a Detroit public school district, the first thing that you see when you enter our schools are metal detectors. You see police officers, you have to have your ID checked, your bags checked, even your clothing. And I think that's a really big thing that's affecting our young people these days, is feeling unsafe in our schools. And I would say that if we start redirecting a lot of these funds that we put towards our police department, we will see a really big change in the education and the lives of our young people. It is really important to understand. It's really important to feel safe and comfortable in the school that you're in, and that's not really something that I experience the carceral system is really something that was overshadowing the education that I wanted to receive. And then still understanding that as a Black person, we are already so over-policed just within our communities. And then to have that follow us into our schools is a problem. DPS is one of the only school districts in Michigan that has a police department designated to all of our schools. So when you think about that, these are first, second graders who are coming into contact with police every single day, whether that's directly, whether that's indirectly, and that's a problem. And it's definitely a problem in Michigan. It's definitely a problem nationwide. But one thing I'll say, just a quick fact, is that the first school resource officer to ever be implemented in the United States was in Flint, Michigan. So clearly we see a pattern of these things in Michigan, and we understand that's something that definitely has to change.
Thank you. Imani, one or two policies you'd change?
Sure. I want to go back definitely to Rep Tate's point about full and equitable funding. I think at my organization, we believe that we need to reinvest in Detroit, specifically in our neighborhood schools. Right now in Detroit, half of our students attend charter schools, half of our students attend DPSCD, traditional public schools. And what that means is that our traditional public schools are getting half of the per pupil funding that they need to survive. We see right now the COVID dollars are going away. I don't know if you see in the news right now, DPSCD is talking about cutting certain positions that are just necessary, we think, attendance officers, right? And summer school programs are just being cut down because really the district cannot afford it. And so at 482 Forward, what we believe is that we need to reinvest in a district that has been strategically disinvested in. Historically, over time, we've seen it happen. We need to reinvest in our neighborhood schools, and I don't think that we should be scared of a formula. We call it a weighted funding formula, but a formula that gives more to students who need more. I don't think it's bad to say that maybe Grosse Pointe students don't need as much as Detroit students need right now. So let's funnel that money where it needs to go. Thank you. So that's one of the policies that I want to look at. And another thing that we know at 482 Forward is the two largest issues with educating our students right now are chronic absenteeism and summer learning loss. Those are two things that we know need to be addressed. So cutting summer school, not a great thing right now for our public schools. But also there are things that contribute to chronic absenteeism. Transportation is one of them. And that's not just an education problem, that's a city problem. And so how are we also working with the city to fill in the gaps that maybe the district or maybe the education money cannot fill? So those are just a few things.
Thank you, thank you. So often when we have conversations around equity, we talk about what we just did. We talk about here's the current state, here are things that we want to change. So let's imagine a liberatory future. Let's imagine schools as we deserve them, as we envision them to be in the future. So will you complete the sentence? In the future, in this liberatory future, schools will look like this. Who wants to start?
I would say schools across the state can receive a world-class education wherever you come from.
I would say schools look safe. Schools look like a home. They look like a place where you come to learn, make connections, and just really educate yourself and get applied knowledge that we can finally take back into the real world.
I would say my dreams for schools right now would just be that they bring back hope to the communities and hope specifically to my city, that they can just be a place of world building and not preparing for factory life or preparing for menial things. I believe that they can be a place of inspiration, a place to discover yourself, to discover knowledge and discover applied knowledge. And most importantly, I believe that they should be run by the communities. So in my dream world, parents and students are making all of the decisions for our schools.
Amen. So Speaker Tate, you talked about the weighted funding formula, and funding plays a really big role in this. We know ARP dollars are going away. The Michigan Senate proposed a 6% increase in the foundation allowance, which would bring the per pupil student amount up to $9,700, right? And then you also mentioned that there would be some additional supports that can be pulled from different areas for special needs students, English language learners, for equitable needs, I think is said, but I don't know exactly where that falls or where that comes from. And that is great. I do not want to take away from that. That will be historic to have $9,700 per pupil plus extra. It's not the weighted funding formula. And it's sort of reliant on this year, this budget, this administration. What will it take to actually get us to a weighted funding formula that might include a poverty index that is about Detroit, but it is about rural areas across Michigan? What will it take to get us there?
I think there has to be an all hands on deck approach. I mean, we know, and I know that there are a lot of leaders in this audience that have been working on this for, dare I say, decades, around how do we get to this point where we make this better. So I think first and foremost, it's around, how do we set up, and how do we actually agree to what is the problem, because we know too that sometimes that there are differences in terms of problem setting and challenges. How can we agree upon that, and then how do we direct all of our resources there towards these goals, towards the needs around that, and that takes time. I mean, a lot of that too, in terms of the work that we do. We know that elections have consequences. That it's always at times a dynamic place, but if we can identify and all agree and maybe not always all agree, because we don't necessarily do that. But get to a place is we know what the gaps are. We can all agree on in terms of what the problem is, and be able to direct those resources there. And that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of persistence, and that's why we need the Gen Z generation to be involved, because by the time they will me out. They're going to be in, and they're already in. So I think it's going to be incredibly important to have that input and to have that engagement, because it's going to be a long-term process and for us to get to that place and to meet our aspirations where we're supposed to be.
Thank you. Imani, we talk a lot at the Skillman Foundation about not just the teacher shortage, the need to recruit and retain teachers, but in particular BIPOC teachers of color. You talk about this too. Why is this important?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that I am a Black girl raised from Black girl teachers. I've always had Black teachers, and they were instrumental to who I am today. Angelique talked about me graduating from Northwestern. I graduated with a degree in journalism and a double major in Black studies. And so I am a person that has just been built up by Black teachers, Black love, and I think it's really important to see yourself when you're being taught. I don't think, one of the things I struggled with a lot at Northwestern was not seeing myself and really feeling like I shouldn't be here. And so then what's the implication in elementary school, in middle school, in high school of never seeing yourself reflected in your teacher or in the curriculum, right? And so I definitely think it's important for us to recruit teachers of all backgrounds, of all cultures, so that one, students can feel the culture that they're used to, but also so students can be exposed to different cultures that they might not know, different languages, different foods, different books, right? I talk a lot about how being a student raised by Black teachers, I read Black books. But then I'll go out and hear, they weren't in the curriculum, by the way. My teachers were giving me their personal books to read. Oh, you're above grade level, you should try this book. Actually, I know your mom is a pastor, so you might like this book. Just taking personal interest in me as a person and developing me individually. And so just the importance of having a teacher that sees you, that understands where you come from, that really matters. And what I also wanted to say is DPSCD actually has a 82% rate of Black teachers. So I think in DPSCD, we're actually doing it right. We have the Black teachers. The problem is that we need to be able to pay them. We need to be able to compensate them. We need to be able to retain them. Otherwise, other cities are competition, and they need teachers as well. And so when we talk about needing teachers of color, BIPOC teachers, we also got to be able to pay them and pay them right and pay them what they're worth. And so I think a way we can do better on retaining and finding Black teachers is A, paying them, but also just investing in teaching programs at a younger age. I think I see a lot of students who are like, a teacher? Absolutely not. It just doesn't seem like an attractive job right now. How can we make it more attractive, more accessible, more attainable, and a fun-looking job, should I say? That's what I say about teachers.
Just before the Mackinac Policy Conference, the Detroit Academy of Arts and Sciences announced they would be paying their teachers $100,000 a year.
See?
So Eva Mello, I want to talk about what Michigan needs to do around its population. And we did an interview yesterday, which was super fun with Cranes. And this question came up, and you both had different answers. The question was, would you stay? Or why would you stay? Or do you want to stay in Michigan? You are young, you are talented, you are Black, you are beautiful. How do we get you to stay? And Imani, you said, I'm coming back, and a lot of my friends are coming back, and we're here, and Detroit is fantastic. And Eva Mello, what did you say?
I want to stay, but I don't know if I will. And if I do stay, it'll definitely be because of the people. Especially in Detroit, I think the love of community, the love that we all have for each other is definitely a reason to stay. But when you think about things like transportation, whether it's reliable, is it accessible, and you look at places like New York, where they have reliable and accessible transportation everywhere. I think it's really interesting that we call ourselves the home of the Motor City, but we don't have reliable transportation everywhere. And I think that it's almost laughable sometimes, honestly. And I would say also, how are we caring for our young people? Are we putting the same amount of effort and love that we put into so many other things in our society back into the most valuable assets that we have, which are our youth?
Thank you. So there are lines in the budget around placemaking to create more transportation, more walkability, and seeing those in certain districts across Michigan. I'm saying this to you, Speaker Tate, just so that you can carry this with you. Not just a suggestion, not lobbying. I want to ask the audience, how many of you participated in after-school programming? So basically, almost everyone. And obviously, if you participate in after-school programs, you become a fancy pants who gets to come to the policy conference. But for the very first time in our history, there's money in the budget proposed to go to out-of-school time programming, $50 million, which is a historic amount. So, Speaker Tate, can you talk about why this is important?
I think it's a good, I think the audience recognize the importance of it as well too. But I mean, when you look at all of the beyond anecdotally, people going latchkey kids or playing sports or other extracurricular activities, that was such a big part in shaping youth and as a kid. So, and you see where the data is around that. Like having those after school supports is kind of paramount to development of kids and just kind of that social emotional learning piece as well too. And I had a bias towards more physical activity, and we know like how that plays such a large role in development. So I don't think it's in either or. Certainly it has to be an and with those investments in after school programming.
What was the sport you played?
Ice skating.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
It was like snow and rain coming in because there's nothing I could do about it, so I just worked it out. I just had my bucket there, put some towels down. That's it. And just do what I do to make it work.
That's lifelong Detroiter Samala Dean talking about a gaping hole that was in the roof of her 100-year-old home on the city's northeast side.
Dripping and dripping and dripping, and one day it just fell in. I had planned to get it patched, but I never could come up with the $500 this man was going to patch it for me.
Ms. Dean is a senior, disabled, and qualifies for a property tax exemption for low-income residents, which made her a prime candidate for the city's Renew Detroit home repair program. It's a $45 million effort to help 2,000 low-income Detroiters fix up their homes over the next 4 years. Those who applied in the first round could receive a new roof at no cost. A second phase of the program opened in October and will include window replacements.
My guess is if we drove down the street 3 or 4 years ago, you wouldn't see people fixing up houses along here, right?
Dean was one of the first people to get a new roof through Renew Detroit.
We get Ms. Dean's roof done. I think you're going to see more and more investment in this community.
I am so excited to have a roof and so emotional because I never ever dreamed this could happen to me.
Renew Detroit only goes so far. Just a small fraction will get help who need it. The University of Michigan research estimates 38,000 families are living in homes that need repairs.
Most people need roofs, gutters, siding, brickwork, porch work, windows. They need everything.
Vanessa Taylor lives less than 5 miles west from Dean in a house that she's owned for 40 years.
The house was built in 1920.
Taylor says she also applied for the Renew Detroit program, but she hasn't yet heard whether she qualifies.
I would like to get the siding done on my house. I would like to get the roof done, and I would like to get the rest of the new windows in the house. I get that done, I'm okay.
Taylor estimates it will take $20,000 to $40,000 to do the repairs. She's on a fixed income.
You know, I have to make sure that I'm getting food for myself. I have to make sure that my DTE bill is paid. I have to make sure that my water bill is paid. By the time I finish doing all that, I'm lucky if it's like $200 left.
With roofs, like on a small house, a roof is $10,000.
Edith Ford with Mac Development says even with programs to help, gaps in the system leave many Detroiters short.
So if you need a roof, it's raining in your house, you got mold and mildew in the walls, it's affecting the electricity, your health and everything. It's a long time getting help. It's hard a lot of times for citizens to know how to navigate the programs.
Ford says the city is partly to blame. Residents have been overtaxed an estimated $600 million following the Great Recession, money that could have gone toward fixing their homes.
They could have been able to save towards to getting their own roof. I had one lady here, her payment plan was like $782 a month. Her mortgage was never that much to pay her back property taxes. But then when the Detroit Home Property Tax Relief Grant came from the Gilbert Foundation, we were able to get her a property tax exemption and to get that past due amount wiped out. When that came, you would hear people banging and hammering. People started fixing stuff on their houses.
That's interesting. So the direct impact of like giving people some tax relief is they immediately went and
they immediately started doing stuff on their house that they know they needed to do.
Foundations owned by billionaire Dan Gilbert are helping Detroiters with their taxes and home repairs. His $20 million Detroit Home Repair Fund was announced this spring.
Incredibly, when we rolled out the Detroit Home Repair Fund, we saw about 150,000 phone calls in the first 48 hours and 250,000 phone calls in the first week, which was honestly an emotional realization because we had just tens and tens of thousands of people who really needed support, and they were not getting it from existing ecosystem partners.
The Gilbert Foundation expects to help 1,000 Detroit homeowners pay for repairs over the next 3 years. But that's still just another small fraction, as so many more Detroiters are going to miss out.
We don't see our role as, serving every single person in this system. I think that's really the role of the broader social safety net, the city of Detroit, the Wayne County, the community partners who are working in this space every day.
Some Detroiters are finding creative ways to raise money. Field Street Block Club President Janine Spencer crowdfunded more than $14,000 in the last year to help families in the Island View neighborhood on Detroit's east side.
We're actually able to help like 4 families, not just with heat, but with other home repairs.
I feel like the fact that you guys are fundraising really shows the gaps in these programs.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't have to do that if these programs were able to serve everybody.
No, not at all, not at all. I don't qualify. I'm not disabled, nor am I a senior. So I don't qualify for these home repair grants. So what do I do?
So what happens when Detroiters don't get help?
It makes people leave because they give up. It stops passing on generational wealth. It's always attack on our housing so that we're losing our houses.
So what's the effect on the black middle class then in Detroit?
Well, what has happened, that has driven the black middle class out of Detroit. You got to have all income levels and all classes of people to make a city work. And that has driven them out, because why should I spend $100,000 to rehab this house when the one next to me is like only God and cobwebs is keeping it up.
I mean, we're talking about quality of life at the end of the day, right?
Yes, and equity, making our community resilient.
And President of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Rick DeVore.
I'm all set. Good morning. I love the fact that Tina Turner brought us in here because we've been waiting for this moment a long time. I guess it's not great to be Thursday morning after a long Wednesday night, but thank you for coming. Yeah. With that said, I think this is a unique panel, and I think when you get done, you're going to really understand why we're so excited about it. When you look at public-private foundations or partnerships, you don't always think about, criminal justice reform and how does that intersect with economic development. So you're going to hear about that today. And really, the one thing about workforce development that we want to emphasize is we really need the shift. We need to pivot and make sure that the programs are inclusive to all. So hopefully you'll hear that this morning. Again, I want to thank you for coming here. And this morning, my co-moderator, my partner in crime is Mackinac Clark. We have a unique relationship between the Hudson Weber Foundation and the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. Joe Hudson is the link. Joe Hudson started the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan in 1984, and obviously the Hudson families and the Webers joined some time ago to form the Hudson Weber Foundation. So in addition to that, we're parking mates. We park right next to each other. We're in the same building. She's the sister that I never had, quite frankly. But with that, we really are looking forward to this meeting. Regarding the Greenway, and Matt Cullen's here today, and he's the lead architect of this, and Mark Wallace, and really the chief architect of the fundraising. But one of the things that I've been quoted on in the media, and I'm just going to emphasize, is for me, and why we're having this meeting, where the Greenway comes in, is for me, good to great. It's good to build it. Great would be economic development and housing development in and around that 27-mile stretch. That's going to be beautiful. So we're going to examine that as well. And before I turn it over to Mackinac, I just want to emphasize that there will be Detroit Regional Chamber people walking around with those green cards. We really want to underscore that we want your participation. So I would appreciate taking advantage of that. Mackinac?
Terrific. Thank you, Rick. It's wonderful to be here, and let me add my thanks to yours for being with us on this early morning. And I appreciate, Rick, you talking about the special relationship that our foundations have and the length of it, which is quite lengthy. But I think that these three projects in particular also show the depth of that partnership, and I think it's important to note that in the ecosystem of philanthropy, the Community Foundation plays a really special role in the sense that it's a place and a table for funders to come together where we can really align around shared objectives, and certainly the Michigan Justice Fund and NEI are examples of that, of funders coming together to invest our resources together and really have a cohesive voice as we enter into different initiatives and public-private partnerships, and I think that's been a real force multiplier. So before turning it over to our panelists, I did want to just make a few observations about the uniqueness of each of these partnerships. And I'll start with the Michigan Justice Fund. And really, it's worth noting for the Michigan Justice Fund that when we came together to start this initiative, it really in some ways came around a question mark or a problem statement about what the public sector, or the choices that the public sector was making and the investments that they were making that in some sense were uninterrogated in terms of what the outcomes were, particularly, I'm talking about the criminal legal system, but our incarceral system in particular. And what we know is that, and I won't overdo it on the stats, I know we've got some good information coming from Ashley, but over the last 3 decades, our spending on incarceration has increased 5 times the rate of our investment in education. And as we think about what that means, again, what are we buying? What are we getting from those investments? There's a whole question, even the question of the data in and of itself, what's the data infrastructure to tell us what the answers to those questions are, is something that we don't have in the way that we should for the amount of money that we put into this system. But we know other things about bias in that system and what if you think about public safety as the ultimate goal, well, what are the harms? What is happening to folks going through this system, to their families, to the communities that are impacted in that way? And so we're excited to hear from Ashley to hear more about how the Justice Fund has oriented around that problem statement and what the partnerships have looked like with the public sector in terms of trying to drive change. But I start that problem statement around a question of investment. And if we're thinking about what ultimately leads to lasting and enduring resilient communities, we can look to the New Economy Initiative, which has an answer to that question, and from its inception has really lifted up in a way that's really been a disruptor in terms of thinking about our economy and the way in which small business and entrepreneurship can really have the opportunity to drive our city and region forward. So really excited to hear from Wafa about what the opportunities are there. And then we heard about the JL Greenway partnership with our inaugural executive director, Liana. And as Rick mentioned, we've got Matt Cullen here who's spearheading this unified Greenway campaign, which is about the Greenway. It's also about completing the riverfront. And it's about sustaining these wonderful parkways in a way that will endure. And at its very inception and in the conception of the design, it is itself a public-private partnership. That's the innovation of it from the beginning that has been thought through, and this ambitious goal has been started with significant resources and capacity from the city, the county, the state, and also from federal resources. So, so much to talk about. And to start, I think we're going to start with Wafa to just set it up for us and tell us more for those that are not initiated about the New Economy Initiative.
Yeah. So thank you, Malinka. Thank you, Rick. The New Economy Initiative is a funder collaborative. And I want to start by saying in the Detroit region, we are incredibly lucky to have philanthropy that works together, that funds their money together, and really sets a goal and works towards that goal. So NEI was really created by the idea that, the old saying that when the United States gets a cold, Michigan gets the flu. Funders came together and said, how do we make our economy more resilient? How do we diversify the industry within Southeast Michigan? And NEI was born out of that idea. Initially, it was a funder. They pulled together $100 million to really start to attract and bring in tech, high growth, entrepreneurship. And it's really evolved to become a national model. We get people from all over the country looking at NEI and calling us and saying, how have you done this? How do we duplicate this work? And how do we make this happen? Like, Detroit has really been on the forefront of entrepreneurship support and doing this work. And really, the rest of the country is just starting to come along to realize how important entrepreneurship is. In our state, 50% of employees are employed by small businesses. And we really believe that we need to start putting resources into into those small businesses to make sure that they grow. As we think about entrepreneurship, as we think about our economy, the next Fortune 500 company is already here. The idea is with somebody in our ecosystem, is with somebody in our region, and how do we engage them and how do we give them the resources to be able to start their business, grow their business, scale it, and be able to hire people within our region and really start to grow that environment. We are, like I said, we've been around since 2007. We're a funder collaborative. We're continuing to fund nonprofits that do the business support work. And we really look at the ecosystem, the small business ecosystem holistically. And we're constantly moving and improving to fill the gaps in the ecosystem. We're always assessing what industry is missing here. How do we fill those gaps? How are entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color, how are they not being supported, and how can we fill those gaps to be able to support them? There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work at the regional level. There's a lot of work still to be done within our own network. But more importantly, we really want to encourage the state to step in and to start to support entrepreneurs and small businesses the way that they do some of the larger industries. And we really want to make sure that there is a voice for entrepreneurs because they are hustling and they are doing the work day to day, and they don't have the resources to be able to go to Lansing or to be able to have a lobbyist to say, we don't have resources, we don't have an office of entrepreneurship, we don't know how to navigate all of the resources that are available. How do we make it easier for entrepreneurs? And how do we provide the incubators? How do we provide the resources? How do we provide the capital and make sure that they're capital ready to be able to access all of these resources that are available to them? So this is really the goal of NEI, is to grow entrepreneurs, to be able to support the entrepreneurship ecosystem and really make our economy more robust and more small business friendly.
Well, Fa, could you maybe share with people real quickly approximately how many grants a year, dollar amount? I know it's a lot of grants, but dollar amount.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do between $5 and $6 million in grants. We have 32 grantees currently, and we really divide our grantees into 3 buckets. We grant money to capital providers, which are CDFIs. We have practical assistance, technical assistance providers, those that actually do the on-the-ground work that will help a business get their accounting in order, help a business with their legal, help them find a brick and mortar location, and really do the hand-holding and the really hard work that comes with technical assistance. And then we have what we call trusted connectors. Those are the organizations that are in the communities that either that know every single business on their block or have the language and are able to be that are trusted by the entrepreneurs, that can take the entrepreneurs, assess what their needs are, and connect them with the technical assistance that they need.
Thanks.
Should we move to
Ashley's next?
Yep.
Thank you. So the Michigan Justice Fund is a really exciting initiative of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. We are a funder collaborative and a philanthropic initiative designed to address issues of mass incarceration across the state. We have 3 primary areas of focus. One is supporting the economic mobility of directly impacted people, which is our workforce development and reentry work. The second is reducing the state's reliance on incarceration. And the third is supporting advocacy and movement work towards addressing these issues. We are a statewide initiative and are really excited to work with partners across the state to address these issues and understand that different parts of the state have different needs and different approaches for addressing them. We also know, and one of the focuses of the fund is making sure that people understand how widely communities across Michigan are impacted by mass incarceration. Michigan is 10th in the United States for most people incarcerated by population. Additionally, we know that there are racial disparities across the criminal legal system. African American people make up 14% of the state's population, but 53% of the prison population. And of that population, 30% of the individuals inside of the Michigan Department of Corrections, that's people who are incarcerated, come from Wayne County. So there are clear disparities. And we also know that directly impacted people have very serious challenges when it comes to employment. The national employment rate or unemployment rate is about 3.9%, but for directly impacted individuals, unemployment is at about 27%. And so these are very sobering facts, but I choose to see it as an opportunity because now that we understand how many people are impacted, it's an invitation for all of us to work together to address these issues. One other thing that I forgot to say is that we know that in Michigan right now, there are between 2 and 3 million people with some sort of criminal record. And so that's about 1 in 4, or closer to 1 in 3 individuals. And so this is an issue that impacts all of us. It's across socioeconomic levels, but we know that people that come from poor communities are disproportionately represented as well. And so we see this as a chance for us to come together through a variety of mechanisms to address these issues. We have a lot of partnerships that we're really excited about that I'll get into a little bit later, but are really looking for opportunities to shift public spending away from punitive systems that we know don't deliver the results that we're looking for, towards more innovative and collaborative approaches that will lead us to more thriving communities, which are the real answers to public safety.
Liana?
Well, I am.
Got your boss 15 feet away, nothing like it, huh?
Right. I got a number of my board members in here, so I'll be on my best behavior. So the new kid on the block. So the Joe Louis Greenway Partnership was launched formally in 2022. And so I think I just need to lay the foundation for this discussion and what the Joe Louis Greenway is. It's a 27.5-mile interconnected path that connects 4 communities in Wayne County: Dearborn, Detroit, Highland Park, and Hamtramck. And so for those of you who've not had an opportunity to venture in those areas, I just want you to think about taking 27 miles through urban settings and really developing some green space and some activations that will connect neighborhoods. You really have to visualize that the Greenway is taking the beauty of the riverfront, the world-renowned riverfront, and taking it right into the neighborhoods in some of the most challenged parts of the cities. And then what it's doing is making sure that as we think about green space, as we think about the health and wellness of our communities, downtown as a neighborhood, it's saying that those same things should be in other neighborhoods within our city. So the partnership is here as a steward and a partner to all of the stakeholders, the residents that are involved. We're here to support the programming, to augment the services that the city of Detroit will provide, and to work with the other municipalities, Highland Park, Dearborn, and Hamtramck, to ensure that this amazing transformational development has the long-term sustainability in perpetuity. We'll be here to support the endowment that'll be housed at the Community Foundation, and with our partners, Hudson Weber, William Davidson, and all of our other funders, to ensure that when we think about this project and the magnitude and the capacity for change, that residents are at the center, but that it does provide a unique experience for individuals to visit the cities. And so as I think about it with the partnership and what we're going to do and how we begin to think about our work, it's really how does the Greenway become that attraction in our region, that not only are we driving up to Mackinac 4 hours, but people from Mackinac are driving to Detroit to experience the Greenway and to experience our communities and our neighborhoods in such a way that highlights the neighborhoods, that highlights the residents in their highest and best way. And so it's my honor to step in as this inaugural executive director to really begin to work with community, to work with our partners to set that vision and to make sure that we're able to execute on that. When I think about the city of Detroit, when I think about our partners and the other municipalities, there is some historical trauma there. And so to create a partnership and a nonprofit that works with cities to do this work is really thoughtful to ensure that there is some accountability between all of us so that we do deliver to the residents.
Thank you. Malik, I think I'm first up. I'm going to start with Wafa, and this is really exciting to me. Talk to us a little bit about this. You're leading a statewide coalition to focus on micro business lending, which obviously is different than your current charge of just more of a Wayne County or Detroit centric. So can you talk a little bit about that.
So we have a micro-business policy coalition, and coming out of COVID, we really saw a gap in the policy and how the state thinks about small businesses, specifically micro businesses, those that have 10 and under employees, and those that are really staples in the neighborhood businesses that are really keeping the neighborhoods alive and building up the economy in these neighborhoods. As the state and the federal government, first it was the PPP. We know that didn't go to the small businesses, and then PPP 2 did a little bit better. But for these micro businesses that might not have banking relationships, they weren't able to access these programs. And then the state had a couple relief programs, and also they were flops. They didn't go to the people they were supposed to. A big chunk of the money went to the casinos, and those are not the people that the funds were intended to. So we really started with the problem, and we really started looking at how do we solve this problem? How do we give a voice to micro businesses? And let's figure out what are some of the low-hanging fruits that we can advocate for. And so we looked at rural, urban, west side, north, and we got a coalition together to really look at how we can make our state more small business, micro business friendly. And we started putting together a policy agenda. I mean, and at the top of our list is we want the state to define a micro business so that when they build programs in the future, they can dedicate funding and resources directly to those micro businesses and really target those businesses that need the most support and need the most help and are really carrying the neighborhoods and are really the anchors of economic development. And we have quite a few other. We're pushing for an Office of Entrepreneurship within the state that can really be the place for small businesses to go to be able to navigate all of the state departments and all of the resources that are available to them. And we really want to make sure that the state understands that there is 50% of employees are employed by small businesses, and it's a very important part of our economy, and it's incredibly important that we put resources towards growing and maintaining those businesses here in our region, and really start to grow those businesses, attract more entrepreneurship into our region, and become the startup state, essentially.
And just if I can add, as a recovering banker, I can say this. I don't know if people are aware of this, but when PPP was first stood up, the first instructions from the federal government to the banks were it was a program for existing customers. Got to think about that one for just a minute. Existing customers, the people we're talking about serving here didn't have a bank, right? So I mean, that was not a good start to PPP. Now that was changed, but I mean, that's why this was so important.
Yep. Yeah. Intentions matter. My question is for Liana, and I wonder if you might say a bit more about the specific impacts you might anticipate for neighborhoods and residents.
Great question. I think, in the context of this conversation, when we talk about, the power and the impact of public-private partnerships, the Greenway is a really wonderful example, modern-day example of that, and how that can be successful in providing public space and providing large-scale projects. In terms of the effort from the city, right, having the philanthropy come together and all of the different stakeholders allows the city to be able to leverage its resources. I think we have to remember that cities aren't designed to do everything. And we need these partnerships to bring in other stakeholders that are willing to invest in these large-scale projects that will have a lifetime of positive results for residents. When I think about the Greenway, we're talking about the opportunity for economic development. We're talking about how do we ensure that this project is an actual true catalyst that spurs more economic development that supports the health and wellness of the residents and the communities that are already there. For the partnership, we're thinking about how are all the stakeholders, the cities, the municipalities from the state, the federal, the county, able to come together and pull together strategies that ensure that we're really layering these efforts. When I think about the endowment, we were able to pull together this endowment that says we want to take the stakeholders and the funding, and we want to think about how we fund this project to ensure that the Greenway is active with people. We can develop this project, but if residents don't enjoy it, if visitors don't come to it, it really is not serving the intended purpose. And so to have the endowment, to have the partners come together and say, we want to make sure that we are here as partners, that the funding will be there so that there's programming, so that there are resources, so that there are opportunities for this space in its entirety. And I think it's different, right? Most of the times we're thinking about a park that's in one space and that's touching just one or two communities. This Greenway is touching over 23 communities. There'll be over 16,000 households impacted by this Greenway. It's going to increase access to green space, to neighborhoods and individuals who may have parks, but they may not be able to get to the parks. There are access points that cut between communities where residents will be able to kind of walk to it from their homes. And so to have all of the stakeholders come together with this unified mindset and this idea about how do we make this work, and how are we thoughtful about residents and making sure that we're elevating that. And then the final thing is thinking about what you're talking about, Wafa, is the small business opportunities. We have to be intentional about the programming, about the housing, to ensure that these strategies include residents. Residents have the capacity to do these things, to be at the table, to support. And the partnership is here as that partner to ensure that the funders, the stakeholders, the city, we all have the resources, and we're really congregating around the communities in the Greenway.
Ashley, you're next up, but before I get to my question, I want to brag on Ashley just a real quick moment. She didn't say this, but in addition to being an attorney, which makes her qualified for this work, more importantly in my mind, she was a public defender in the city of New York. So I think there's no doubt that she definitely has walked in the shoes of a lot of these situations. And I'm very, very proud of that. But can you give us you probably wondered where in the heck was he going on that? But you never can tell with me, right, Ashley? Can you give us some examples of public-private partnerships? And also, you do have a lot of policymakers at this conference. What would be your call to action for them? So this is kind of a two-part question.
So there's so much to be excited about and proud of with the Michigan Justice Fund, but there are two partnerships that really come to mind when I think about public-private partnership. As Malenka mentioned earlier in her remarks, one of the challenges that the state is facing is a lack of data transparency. And so even more fully understanding how many people are impacted is a win. And we see part of our duty as to stimulate more transparency and data. And so one of the relationships that we've developed is a partnership between the University of Michigan Youth Policy Lab and the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, where we have resourced a fellow who sits inside of LEO and is looking at public spending as it pertains to justice-involved individuals, and is not only looking for new opportunities to invest in this population, but looking more closely at programs and spending that's already taking place and how justice-involved individuals can be more contemplated and centered in initiatives that already exist. And so we're really excited about the research and data that's come out of that initiative, and have also set up a second fellowship that's inside of the State Court Administrator's Office looking at youth justice in a similar fashion. So that's one example of a partnership that's really going to yield significant dividends past the life of the fund. A second partnership that we're really excited about is with Michigan Works. So last December, we made a substantial round of investments in organizations and entities that are focused on innovation in workforce development and reentry. And Michigan Works applied for 2 grants, one at Oakland County, so a locally based organization, and then statewide Michigan Works. And the statewide organization of Michigan Works is looking at how their programming can better support directly impacted individuals and developing best practices for supporting people who are returning home from jail and prison. And one of the things we're most excited about with that partnership is that they have decided to engage directly impacted leaders in their strategy, And so they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk of engaging people who best understand the impact of mass incarceration and infusing their insights and expertise into the strategy that they hope to execute. And one of the things that makes the fund, I think, really distinctive is that we have worked hard to make sure that we have a wide variety of voices at the table, which ranges from policymakers, elected officials, and communities that are most impacted and directly impacted individuals. So to see that partnership emerge is something that we're really proud of and excited to see what comes next. And in terms of policy opportunities, something that's really on my mind and on the mind of the fund is Clean Slate. So Clean Slate legislation was adopted and passed in 2020. And as of this April, the Clean Slate process has become automated. For those who are less familiar, Clean Slate is an initiative focused on expungement, because we know that there are a lot of challenges and hardships that face people with a criminal record. And through Clean Slate, there's an expanded expungement process. And as I said, as of April, for people who have convictions with that fall into certain categories, their records will be automatically expunged. And while we're really excited about the opportunity, one of the things that we are still working to navigate is how to make sure that people actually know that this is happening, because there isn't a widespread strategy for notification around the existence of this exciting opportunity. And then once people do understand that they have this opportunity, making sure that they can navigate the process. And so we're looking to continue stimulating partnerships and relationships with publicly funded entities and government stakeholders to make sure that we're able to maximize this opportunity so that we can better stimulate Michigan's workforce and support directly impacted populations, their families, and the broader community.
It's actually worth noting on that expungement piece that data has shown for folks that have criminal records, if you look at blacks and whites with the same, there have been not studies, but actually planned, and I'm forgetting the word, it's not just looking at people that have records, but people that pretend that they have records, whatever that's called, and have similar experience as they've gone into the employment market. The data has shown that Black people are, same set of circumstances, same background, are penalized more for having a record than whites that have that same record, and that in fact, whites with records are still admitted into entry-level positions, which what this study was for, than Blacks without records. So the bias and discrimination that we have in the employment market is certainly exacerbated by these records, and so that's another win for the expungement work. But I want to ask a question for Wafa, which is about NEI and the national model that and support for entrepreneurship that you guys have been able to bring forward. We're very lucky in Southeast Michigan to have the work of NEI, but obviously that's not for the state. Is there anything that you can share with the audience about opportunities for replication?
Yeah, I want to start by saying, we have the Michigan Justice Fund, we have the Joe Louis Greenway Parkways, and then we have NEI, which focus on entrepreneurship. And it all seems a little disjointed, but the collaboration and really connecting all of this is what makes us a national model, because we look at returning citizens. How can we, entrepreneurship has a low barrier for entry. How do we get them into the entrepreneurship pipeline? How do we make that a possibility? How do we make them, the CEOs of companies once they're, out and ready to rejoin society? Because that is a low barrier for entry. So we work with the Michigan Justice Fund on returning citizens and entrepreneurship. And then with the Joe Louis Greenway, how do we think about that intentionally to incorporate, the folks that have been in those communities for a really long time? How do we take their entrepreneurial ideas and get them involved in the Joe Louis Greenway development? And how do we make sure that they're included and at the table as their neighborhoods change and as their neighborhoods develop? We really want to think about this stuff intentionally, and we've thought about this stuff intentionally, which is why we've become a national model. And we've been very lucky at NEI because we've had funders who are willing to let us try anything. To kind of test things out. And sometimes it works out really well, and sometimes we have to pivot, and it doesn't work out so well. And we've been really able to document all of our ups and downs and what's been successful, and be able to share that with the country and really with our state. And we want people to replicate what NEI is doing in Southeast Michigan throughout the state, because it is working. The data shows that it's working. We are leveraging the dollars that philanthropy is putting into real development, into real generational wealth building. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs of color and women, and those that have barriers. We want them to grow generational wealth. We want them to make money. We want them to employ from their communities and from people around them, and we want them to grow our economy to become more robust.
If I could, too, when I think about what you said about how our different organizations are interconnected, for the partnership, there is information out there that shows that creating green space in urban settings does reduce crime. It does improve the health and wellness of the people who live there. And so when I think about Michigan Justice Fund, there is direct tie in how our neighborhoods and our cities are built that really drive crime. And so as we begin to understand the importance of beautiful green space that is right in individuals' backyard, that really ties to saying how we are trying to shift the narrative, how we're trying to shift our population and our communities. And then the opportunities for small business with residents is just there with the Greenway. And what we want to do with our partners is make sure that we are intentional each and every way, checking ourselves to make sure our residents at the center. And that is the thing that we should use as our barometer as we start to measure and think if we're getting off track, to go back to that question. Are residents at the center? Are we ensuring that residents' voices are included? And how are we building programs? How are we activating the space that represents the unique cultures in each of the 23 neighborhoods? All of these communities are not a monolith. Each one can be different, and we can think about how we layer that in. And so that's just another tie that I felt was really important in all of our organizations.
Liana, since you have the floor, so to speak, last week you cut the ribbon on southwest portion.
Southwest.
What's next?
So for the partnership, we have the first section in the neighborhood that is in the West Warren community that's going to be coming online in October. And as we think about it, it's how do we program that space? How do we get the word out about this amazing project that is right in individuals' backyards so that they can begin to envision what this is going to be like for their families. And so we're doing a lot of planning through that process. And so awareness is a big thing for the Greenway because it's a big project, and it's a project that has been thought about and conceptualized, I think, for over 20 years in this region. And now to actually have the resources from ARPA and the city to be able to come in and begin the construction, and all of the stakeholders and partners through the Unified Greenway come together and say we need to make this happen. We can't lose this moment right now. It's really to make sure that the stakeholders, the corporations, everyone in the region knows that this is not just a Detroit project. This is a project for Michigan, and everyone needs to understand how important it is. We want to make sure that this is something that's drawing in individuals. Resident engagement is a big priority for us. And then finally, I would say, making sure that we are in tune with our partners and how we think about the community, not just today, but we think about 20, 30, 40 years in the future, because we don't want to make decisions that are perfect as our communities are right now, but then have adverse impact as our communities change and shift throughout this process. And so we want to be intentional about interrogating our purpose, interrogating our intention, and to make sure that we do this right and that we are responsible stewards of this project so that your children's children can be experiencing this Greenway in their communities and extending it outside of its current footprint. Like if we were to sit here and close our eyes, it's 27 miles now, but the potential for what it can grow to be is magnified by all of us in this room.
And we would be remiss if we didn't shout out Megan from the city of Detroit, has been hugely helpful on this project.
Yeah. Terrific leadership.
She is definitely our Greenway champion.
Yes, she is definitely our Greenway champion.
Terrific. I just want to remind folks that we're going to open it up for audience questions in a moment, and then turn to Ashley to ask you a question. And so much of the examples that you shared, Ashley, have been around the fund and philanthropy, in particular, partnering with the public sector. Are there examples, or what are the opportunities around the business sector, which is so important to advancing the goals along the whole line, but certainly with the Michigan Justice Fund too?
So I think there's a multifaceted answer to that question. And I just want to underscore that I think Michigan is at a really, really critical moment where we have an opportunity to decide who we want to be as a state, because understanding the impact and the breadth of the ways and the numbers of people who are impacted and have criminal records, we're facing a workforce shortage, and also navigating how to best address recidivism. And engaging and employing formerly incarcerated individuals is a way to address both of those things at the same time. And so I am offering an invitation for people to think along with us creative ways to do this, but I will also offer some suggestions on how to do this. So I think there are a number of really interesting and exciting organizations that we partner with and support that are training directly impacted people after incarceration. And so one suggestion, because I think a lot of people get stuck on, well, how do I find people? How do I identify the population? Partnering with organizations who are already engaged with returning citizens is one way to meet and engage people, and to partner with organizations who are especially focused on supporting this population and helping you as an employer navigate best practices for making sure that their employment is maintained. I also think as it pertains to education, I'm really excited about community colleges and stimulating partnerships and pathways through with the Michigan Department of Corrections and other local jails on how to stimulate opportunity and engagement with community colleges. One of the reasons that I think they're really exciting is because community colleges exist across the state and are accessible to people, in particular in rural communities. We know because of the governor's task force on jail and pretrial incarceration that rural populations have the fastest growing presence in jails across Michigan. And so making sure that that community and those populations are supported through opportunities like education is one way to support, to address recidivism and to support this population in their economic mobility. And then finally, something that I'm thinking a lot about is policymakers and the chance to reduce barriers into certain professional licensing. So we made a grant to Safe and Just Michigan in December that is allowing them to look at ways that through legislative advocacy, we can reduce barriers to healthcare professions, because right now, people who have any sort of involvement with the criminal legal system, but in particular felonies, are excluded from entering certain professions. And so reducing barriers to entry is another way that we can stimulate employment and engagement for this population.
And we'll I'll have what he's having. Well, Fa, we're going to end with you before we get to the general Q&A. And I think you would agree with all of us in saying that for the state to really reach its full potential, we have to have an economy that's more inclusive and equitable. How do you see that working with public-private partnerships?
I think we need to recognize that there is an equity gap and that there is really an equity problem. And I think until we get to the point where we can say, yes, there is an equity gap, we're not going to do anything. But we have to recognize the equity gap, and then we have to put resources towards that equity gap. And philanthropy can only do so much. There's only so much funding that philanthropy can do. And really, government is the ultimate philanthropy. And government needs to step in and really put resources behind technical assistance, especially in under-resourced communities. And government really needs to start to get rid of some of the red tape. You know, there was an article a couple years ago talking about a restaurant has like 78 steps in the city of Detroit. It needs to go through 78 steps to open. And I know the city is working to address that, but those are some real barriers to entry for under-resourced communities. And that's not, and I don't want to pick on Detroit because it's not just Detroit, it's really municipalities across the board. It's cities, it's counties, and it's the state. I mean, the state has so much red tape that makes it so difficult to navigate. And I really challenge anybody in this room to try and find an easy like how-to register with Laura, or to find a contact person, or to really navigate anything within the state that a small business has to do. And that is compounded with, if English is a second language, if, there's reading barriers, like there's a lot of barriers, and until we start to identify them and say there is very much a racial equity problem, there is really, and we need to directly address it, and we need to directly start to put funding in under-resourced communities. And that includes, the urban core, that includes rural communities, and we really need to be intentional about funding those communities and funding the support that comes along with that.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to ask the staff, and we have microphones around in terms of Q&A. And
Hi, Joel Haroni here as Public Sector Consultants. This question is for Leona. I'm curious, how do you address a widespread sentiment that greenways and other non-motorized infrastructure is not for Detroiters, is not for people in the neighborhoods. It's for people that look like me, frankly. And so I'm curious, what strategies are you using to address that sentiment that's pretty prevalent that I've heard. I'm a Detroit resident, so.
Yeah, I think it is a psychological shift that Detroit has to go through. As I've lived in Detroit my entire life, and I would say that's not the case. The Detroit that I grew up in had parks everywhere. It was a Detroit that I could walk to a park. I walked to the school park. And I think what's happened throughout years of disinvestment is that has crept into our mindset that it's not for us. But I would say that it is. And what I would say is that when I think about this process, I'm 2 months into this role, and one of the first things that kind of began to sit into my head is we have baked into our minds that we're the motor city, and the motor was the car, but the motor is the people. And so when we shift that, it takes us to a different place, right? And so I don't subscribe to who we are not. I subscribe to who we are. And as much as we talk about Detroit and deficit and what we can't do and what's not possible, then that's just what sits in. I talk about us and our people in terms of our asset and what we can do. And so you can't tell me what Detroit can't be, right? No one can tell us that. Detroit has been a contemporary community in the city for hundreds of years, and so over 100 years, so we'll continue to do that. And we have shifted, and we have changed, and we have built, and we have torn down, and we have rebuilt. And so greenways not being for us is not something that I think is who we are at our core, and I think it's a part of the psychological shift that is really rooted in how I think about this work and how I go into communities. Is how do we begin to unpack that idea of people telling us who we're not?
And I think you've done a great job of listening, the whole group, and and really making sure that the voice is heard, and not just, but really getting at it, making trips, seeing other communities. I know down to Atlanta, for example, but I really think that the people in the know that are part of this, the community, I think would echo the fact that it's really been well done. Not a top-down, ground-up.
Yeah.
But
One, you guys killed this. I didn't even really want to come to the conference this year, to be honest. And I got a good wife, so she brought me here. You guys murdered this. Seriously, such a great job. Ashley, I'm thinking about my career as you were talking, and I'm thinking about all the steps. I worked at the county. I teach at community college now. Negotiated a deal with Cullen here about a jail. And I think I was cynical about the business community when I was in government. Now that I'm in it, I get that multiple things can be true. And so, and what Dan used to say is, you can do well by doing good. And I think about our business right now. We have so many jobs open that we just need people who are going to grind. Just straight up. You want to build a helmet? Please. It's like $20 an hour. But when you say this, I'm like, this should have clicked earlier for me. I know better. I used to work at city council. I know better, right? So how do you recommend folks that, like, I'm all about, my whole family's returning citizens, so I know them. This is my life. Like, this is, God loves second chances, right? And third and fourth and fifth and sixth. But what's the next step? Like you said, partner with organizations, and I wrote that down on my phone. What's the next step? Because we got a whole shift. We need to build a lot of helmets this year. And I'm thinking, like, and she delivers a lot of packages. What's the next step? Like, how would you approach this from this side of the table?
So thank you for the question. I'm really excited. The Michigan Justice Fund is housed at the foundation. A lot of our work is powered by amazing consultants. One of them, Sarah McCauley's here. And then we also work closely with Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. And one of the things that we're planning to do is a series of briefings for people who are in different business communities on how to best support this population. So I do think, to be clear, that the business community does have a responsibility to care and engage, but I think that advocates and people like myself who understand the issue and have access to this population should also be facilitating the development of these relationships. But it requires people to sit at the table with us and think through this. So one thing that we're thinking about is, because I really do believe there are people who care and could be engaged, but truly just do not know where to begin. And so being at the Michigan Justice Fund and having this platform and opportunity, one of the things that we want to do is set tables to invite people to learn and engage with us, and then create plans for action. And I mean this too, for people that are interested right now, I have a list of organizations that would be very happy to talk to you about supporting their program participants and employing people as soon as possible. And so there's a longer term strategy, which is this table setting and broader strategy development. And then also people right now with returning citizens who are truly hungry and desire full-time employment. And then I also just want to shout out, we have a relationship with the Center for Economic Opportunity, which is an organization that works on supporting returning citizens with employment opportunities, but they're designed to be short-term employment opportunities that then transition into longer-term engagement across different industries. And so they're up and running in both Oakland and Wayne counties, and would love to talk to people that are interested in hiring returning citizens as well. So I'll just send out our annual report. We can start there. And then also would love to hear from people that want to sit at these tables and work with us on this issue.
My name's John Broad, and I used to run Crime Stoppers of Michigan. And I've always been fascinated in terms of why young people get involved in crime. And I learned that the predictor of people who get involved with crime are people who are chronically absent. And Michigan has one of the very highest chronic absenteeism in the country. Detroit leads the country in terms of, for major cities, in chronic absenteeism. And we have to do everything that we can to be able to do something about this. Detroit alone this year, we expect there's going to be 30,000 children who will be chronically absent. As a result, you're going to see quite a bit of crime. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are people that are really working hard to try and intervene with these kids, but it starts in school. It starts in kindergarten. And I have an organization now called Helping Kids Go to School, which works with parents to try to find out what's getting in the way for them to get their kids to school, so they're not chronically absent, so they don't fall behind, and so they don't reach a point of despair that they're going to turn to crime. So I think those things are really important for us to consider.
It's really great. And I want to also add to what you're saying. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, this is, again, where the state needs to step in. The state needs to provide that safety net. We need to do better for working moms and women who are entrepreneurs. We need to provide daycare. We need to be able to provide family leave. And that's all that's all at the state level. And that's all that we should be talking about this. And we really should be thinking about all of this holistically. And again, when we talk about what we can do on the philanthropy side, we can only take it as far as we can take it. And then policy makers need to step in and really implement some of those larger, really life-changing initiatives and be able to pay for, make it so people can afford childcare, people can send their kids to after-school programs and be able to step in so that chronic absenteeism isn't a problem.
John, you and I have met, as you know, and I would say, though, I want to add to that, we got to get rid of many of the other barriers, including transportation. There's too many moms and dads in Detroit that, they have to take multiple buses just to get one child to school, then it's off to the next one. So, we just need to do a better job on wraparound services and look together about what the barriers are, why that's happening, not, be punitive of the folks. Yep. Well, and thank you for the work. I want to thank everybody for coming, Malenka and I. The common thread here is that Hudson Weber and Community Foundation is involved in every one of these and has funds in every one of these. So I want to thank everybody for coming and enjoy the rest of the conference.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV, the Kresge Foundation.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.
Live from the Grand Hotel, you are watching coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference from One Detroit. I am Zoe Clark, Political Director at Michigan Radio. Earlier today, I spoke with 3 leaders on mobility and the workforce. Trevor Lauer is president and COO of DTE Energy of DTE Electric of DTE Energy. Lisa Lunsford, co-founder and CEO of GS3, and Carla Walker-Miller, founder and CEO of Walker-Miller Energy Services. Great to have you all here.
Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for taking the time. So we're talking so much about labor shortages, workforce development, training, innovation this week. I'm really excited to talk to you 3 within the prism of infrastructure, future of EVs, equitable development. Carla, I want to start with you. Do we have the proper workforce in Michigan right now for these jobs of the future that we've been talking about this week?
We have the right people, but we don't have the right workforce. So there's so much training available, so much that needs to be done. But these are jobs, the jobs of today are jobs of the future. So people have not been trained to maintain EV charging stations, install EV charging stations. There are not enough energy auditors. Our Next Energy is doing battery cell manufacturing. Where are the experienced battery cell manufacturers? Mm-hmm. There are none because the industries are so new. So we are on the precipice of creating the right workforce with the right people here in Michigan.
So what is it going to take to do that?
It's going to take a lot of good training to be scaled and elevated. One of the most exciting things for me is that there are groups of people training, but they're training 10s and 20s and 100s. And we need hundreds and thousands in some cases to be trained in order to serve the needs of the clean energy industry.
Lisa, you testified at a House committee 2 years ago about labor shortages.
Yeah.
2 years ago. 2 years later, is
Yeah.
the message the same?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much the same. And so we're still working with it, working through it, the best we can. And I think, because it's not the power of and, right? It's all of us. And so when we talk about, that's my competitive advantage. I've heard certain people say, hiring people, being able to train up the workforce, that's my competitive advantage. No, it's not. It's all of us. We all have to come together and set up these types of training programs that gives everyone a pool of resources, because not everybody that I train necessarily wants to work for me, but maybe they want to work for Carla, maybe they want to work for DTE, and the folks coming from DTE, I can certainly use them, but there's a commonality, there's a common footprint that we all need to start with. Maybe it's the math skills and we bring the math up. We're talking about technology. What does technology really look like? When we talk about it, everybody talks about software coding. It's not just software coding. We have technology in everything that we touch. When I look at the automobile, I look at it like an iPhone. It is what Steve Jobs said. I didn't create the phone, right? I created the playground that everybody wants to be on. So now we have energy coming into it, energy in a different way. We're looking at wireless, we're looking at the charging. The thing I'm excited about is looking forward and saying, how can my car talk to the next car? And having all these different elements that come together to make that happen.
Because it's going to.
It's going to. It's upon us, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's it's here. Whether I like it or not, it's here. I just love the smell of exhaust in the morning, so I'm sorry.
There's not much of that, though, on Mackinac Island.
No.
The smell of horses in the morning.
Yeah, now that's an interesting one. Yeah.
Not the same.
No, it's not.
Trevor, one of the sessions this week is, are industry and consumers prepared for the electric revolution?
Well, it's coming, so I think industry has to be prepared. And I want to go back to your first questions around workforce, right? So what Lisa was talking about is we have to have a growth mindset. We have to all think about how we get this workforce ready together, because it's going to be a strategic advantage for Michigan and all of the companies in Michigan. Our ecostructure, our ecosystem will all benefit as we work on this together. So we got to work on workforce together and make sure that we're all benefiting from that. And then when I think about the grid, we spend a lot of time talking about, is our grid ready for electrification? The good thing is it's not all coming at once. And what we see is the majority of people that are charging their cars today, 82% in our service territory, do it in their own homes. But then it goes into, well, how do you make sure that charging and electric vehicle electrification is equitable across the whole service territory? I think that's where we need to work with partners like these two to make sure that, how do you put charging into the low-income communities or the rental communities to make sure that they also have access to electric vehicles?
Well, and this goes to this question about, is it equitable, right? Is this electric future equitable? So what kind of work needs to be done? You're talking about it and thinking about it.
Yeah.
What are those next steps?
So at DTE, we will file what we call a transportation electrification plan, and we're doing a lot of stakeholder analysis with everybody right now, trying to figure out what's the right place for DTE to play in that. Look, for people that want to install chargers, if you install private chargers in somebody's home, well, there's a market for that, and there's a reason companies do that, because they see profit in doing that. There's other segments of that market, installing chargers in the public areas for people to charge, low-income areas, rental areas. Right now, that's not a profitable market. So what we're trying to figure out at DTE is, where should we play? Where should we partner?
Right.
And what's that look like for the whole ecosystem so we move vehicle charging forward?
Carla, I know DTE and Walker Miller have opened an academy to train Detroiters to do home energy upgrades. Tell me about this work and what that looks like in the city.
It's some of the most important work to facilitate the electrification, the clean energy economy. And energy audit really is a roadmap, and it helps people understand what to do to make their homes and buildings more efficient. And right now, we spend a lot of money doing the wrong thing. But I think there are fewer than 60 certified energy auditors who are authorized to do federal work right now in the state of Michigan. So with this academy, we're going to put about 40 auditors this year and probably 80 next year. And we are hiring them, training them from Detroit. And when we talk about the power of the clean energy industry is still a very white male industry, but every home in every community needs to be retrofitted. So we have to make sure we're inviting everyone into the industry so that we can retrofit our own communities and drive equity.
And Lisa, this goes back again to this idea of creating this next workforce.
Yes, it does. And so, my thing is that as Trevor mentioned, as Carla mentioned, the academy, how does this work? The strategy, how does this work? Because you can't look at it in silos anymore. Everything is cross-pollinating. So we have to come up with the best solution. When we're talking to the kids, talking to high schoolers is one thing, right? But when you give the parents the knowledge, the information so that they will know how to guide their little ones, it's a lot better because now they know the questions to ask and they know where to tell their children, oh, you need to go here, you need to go there. Right now, they really don't know that. And I think that is a missing piece, is that we're not having the parents in the discussion, But the kids, they got an idea, but they really don't have an idea, so they're still trying to figure that out. They look at it and say, what can I do there? But they don't see the creativity because the industry is so young. The industry is young every year to me because we're always doing something where we're turning a commodity into a new innovation. So we need that new way of thinking, those new ideas, and we have to have an environment in which they can do that. So kudos to you two.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love, this is a new environment. We literally are normalizing clean energy, and we are also normalizing equity.
Yeah.
In the governor's My Healthy Climate Plan, equity is in it 17 times. And that means that every department really should be thinking about how to drive equity as they create the plan, which in the past, equity, if even a thought, has been kind of shoehorned in the back end with the program. Yeah. Now it's a critical element to how the state should be planning. And it's already part of how we are all planning.
Yes. Yeah, because, I'm sorry, Trevor,
go ahead. Please,
go ahead. I was just saying, what is the end result, right? What is it that you're trying to get to? Let's start there and build from there, so then it's not an afterthought. It's not a shoehorn.
Right. Well, and we're so fortunate to have great partners at DTE. And one of the things we're trying to work our way through now is to focus even more of our energy efficiency programs on the customers that most need that help right now. So as you talk about equity, it's the one thing that just strikes me that we can continue to double down on, because we're investing a lot of funds to help a lot of different customers, but we need to make sure we keep an equitable view not only towards electrification, but also as we build out the grid and do other items. We need to make sure we bring clean energy to all of our customers, not just a segment of them.
So we are up here at this conference, more than 1,000 folks who are in it right now over these 3 days and talking about it and excited and discussing it. But who are the stakeholders that need to be at the table the 362 days of the rest of the year when this isn't super top of mind? And are those folks talking to each other as we all head back down 75 South? Trevor, I'll start with you.
Well, my sense is all those stakeholders are here, and it's government, it's business, and it's all the foundations that help drive development and change within the communities that we have the pleasure to live and serve in. So I think the people are here, and these conversations are happening. Look, the administration that we have under Governor Whitmer is driving these discussions, and the agencies and the agency leaders that she have are driving these discussions. You also have great partners where all the partners are having these discussions. Our ecosystem has gone from one where we used to have this scarcity mindset where I had to win and you had to lose. Now we all know we need to win together. So I think it'll naturally continue to evolve as we go.
Yeah, I agree. Were you gonna say?
No.
I agree.
Saying,
my one concern always is not everyone can make it to Mackinac to have these conversations. And there's so many community people, and part of our job is to make sure their voices are heard. And when we go back home, the most important thing we can do is really dig in and listen to the communities. I heard a saying a few months ago that it just sticks with me, and it's do not speak for people you don't speak to. And in order to drive equity, a lot of people up here are going to have to speak to people that they've never spoken to, so that they're planning based on realities and not based on what they think the communities need.
Lisa? Yeah. Oh, well, I agree. The stakeholders, when we're talking about stakeholders, everybody is a stakeholder, right? And you have to be intentional about what it is that you want to do. And if you're not intentional, as you say, if you're not speaking to the people, that's very hard to do. So, but my biggest want is that if we are going to move into this new energy, this new ecosystem, this new economy, we have to have the government to invest. We need investment. You could sit back and say, okay, private industry is going to make this happen, but it doesn't happen without the government partnering with the private sector to make it a go. So we have to execute. We could talk all day long and we could feel good, because we all feel good when we're here. Then we get home and about a week later, we're like, what? I forgot, because we get into the daily grind. But we have to execute on these things that we all agree to. And it's not just one leader, it's all of us leading. We all have to come to the table. I should be able to call Trevor and just say, hey, you remember what you said on that? Okay, well, I'm going to call you up. I want to expand that a little bit more. So I think that's key for us to do. So.
Well, I look forward to hearing next year about those conversations. Again, the 362 days of the year when everybody is not up here. Trevor, Lisa, Carla, thank you so much for the time and the work that you're all doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
To the theater now for the first session of the morning.
This session is Unveiling the Gallup Center on Black Voices, Detroit Data. Please welcome the director at Gallup Center on Black Voices, Camille Lloyd.
Good morning, everyone. It is good to be back on the island. Thank you all for joining me this morning. I want to, first of all, before I start off, to thank the Chamber and Sandy and his team for their partnership with the Gallup Center on Black Voices in bringing what we say it's a proof of concept to life, which is this hyper-local approach to how do we address and create an inclusive process around advancing equity in our society. And so we're appreciative of that partnership. We're appreciative of the Detroit Racial Equity Blueprint Group as stakeholders for your time, for the input in being intentional with us to say, how can we create a research design that doesn't just allow us to have national benchmark, but to also allow us the ability to zone in on the unique needs of Detroiters. So we are particularly grateful for the time and the effort and the intention, and through those relationships was able to reach over 50 different community organizations and residents in the development of this research. So truly an intentional process that was the better part of 2.5 years. And so we're grateful for that partnership at the center. I also want to thank my Gallup colleagues, some of whom are here, but also for all of the hard work that they continue to do since we've launched the work of the center and being able to amplify Black voices and to also quantify people's experiences. And I'd be amiss, most importantly, to thank you all as Detroiters for filling out those surveys. We sent over 150,000 mail packets to households across the city and the greater region, and you all saw it not robbery to give us your discretionary efforts to share your experiences and to complete those surveys, whether it was filling it out and mailing it back in or going online and answering those questions. So we're appreciative of that. So I want to give you a little bit of context in terms of the data that we're going to be going through this morning. It's a very high-level view. You all will have access to the report and the actual data itself to go into the details. But get wonky with me a little bit, right? Because I'm really excited about these data. So the survey was completed in fall and winter of 2022. We had almost 12,000 respondents, and respondents in the city as well as in the Tri-County area of Wayne, Macomb, and Oakland counties. And the overall design was the city was the focus, but the region was the frame. And so when we're going through those data, I'll say Detroiters, that's what I'm talking about, everyone that we heard from across the region, and then I'll get city specific. So we wanted to figure out how people were doing. Gallup over the years have asked Best Life Possible, which is a life evaluation scale. We asked people on a scale from 0, which is your worst life possible, to a 10, which is the best life possible. And it's really an overall subjective measure of well-being. And so we ask people to rate their lives now in terms of how they're doing, and to also think about what that will be like 5 years from now. So their ability to live their best life possible. And what that has allowed us to do is to create a life evaluation index that we were able to do also for the Detroit Resident Voices survey. And when we do that, crunching numbers and analysis, we were able to create 3 categories, and 3 categories of this measure of overall subjective well-being. And what we know is that for thriving, to be thriving in your well-being, this is well-being that is strong, consistent, and progressing. And so we know some specific things about Detroiters who are falling in this bucket in terms of their overall well-being. So if you think about thriving, these are those who are rating a 7 on that. How's my life going now? Okay, I'll give it a 7 or higher in terms of my overall evaluation of how well things are going or my overall quality of life. And when we ask you about your life in the future, you give that an 8 or higher. So you're thinking, my life is going pretty well now, and I'm optimistic about what it will be like 5 years from now. So you'll fit in this bucket of thriving. So for Detroiters who are thriving, when we ask them about, kind of those experiences that they're having in their everyday life, what we see is that Detroiters who are thriving, they're largely satisfied with institutions in their community. So that's the community overall, the schools, the quality of health care, the availability of affordable housing. And what we see is that they're also more likely to report experiencing lots of enjoyment and happiness in their everyday lives, and that they are also likely to have lower rates of health ailments, and they're pretty confident in their ability to get ahead by working hard. Then we have this other bucket where struggling, so those that are struggling in their well-being. And what we see is that, this is well-being that is moderate, but there's some inconsistency. So maybe you're not, kind of thriving in all the areas, but there's some room for improvement. For the most part, these Detroiters are satisfied in terms of the educational system and their ability, the availability of healthcare, and the availability of good jobs. But what we know is that they do not feel like they have what they need to achieve their financial and their career goals. And they're much more likely to be dissatisfied with the availability of affordable housing. So that's what we know about Detroiters that are falling in this bucket of struggling. So when we think about suffering, those who are suffering in their well-being, this is like well-being that is at high risk, right? And so in order to kind of fit in this bucket, you'd have to rate your current life evaluation of a 4 or less in terms of how things are going in your life now, and also a 4 or less when you think about 5 years from now. So if you were to categorize this, you would be like, these are folks who are like, my life isn't going well now, and I'm really not optimistic about how much better it will get in the future. as far as my ability to live my best life possible. So what we know about Detroiters that are fitting in this bucket when we ask them about their everyday life experiences is that they are least likely to be satisfied with the availability of good, affordable housing. Few feel that they have what they need to achieve their career and financial goals, and they're more likely to have health ailments. So we ask a series of questions about whether or not you've been diagnosed by a physician or a nurse, and we have a list of conditions that we ask. And we see that these individuals who are falling within the suffering category are also more likely to have those health ailments or to say that, yes, they've been diagnosed by a physician or a nurse. And what we see is that 2 out of 3 of them do not believe that they can get ahead with hard work. So this is what we start to think about, my ability to live my best life possible. Those that are falling within this bucket are least likely to think that they have a chance. So what are some of the numbers? Yes, in Gallup, I'm gonna come with numbers. So what do we know about Detroiters? Well, overall, for Detroit area residents, 50% of Detroiters are falling within this thriving bucket that I described earlier. Another 45% is within that struggling category, and 5% is in that suffering in terms of their overall well-being. Well, how does this compare nationally? From a regional perspective, they're very similar in terms of what we see nationally for the overall US population, and then for the work that we're doing at the center among Black Americans, also very similar in terms of what we see for overall well-being distribution across the 3 groups for the region. So let's get in a little bit about how does where you live and what you look like impact in terms of the overall well-being and where we see in terms of group distribution. So we see that Black Detroiters are significantly less likely, those that are living in the city, to be falling in this thriving in their well-being category. We do also see that there's a significant distinction between whether you live in the city or whether you live in the suburb. And so 40% of city residents and 52% of suburban residents, way they rate their lives are falling within that thriving bucket. So we do see some differences there. All right, one of the things and the beauty about the data and why almost 12,000 of you responded is the ability to drill down to see what does this look like across the different neighborhoods within the city in terms of how Detroiters are doing in their overall well-being. We see some pockets of excellence, and there's some areas for opportunity in terms of the distribution of well-being. By the way, the dots that you're seeing represents every single survey respondent that participated in the study, so that you can kind of see the range and the depth of the study and our ability to drill down at very, very nuanced levels to understand where those pockets of excellence and where do we need to target efforts in terms of helping Detroiters raise their overall well-being. The next thing I want to say is, so the next question is, okay, yes, now we know how Detroiters are doing. What are those things that we can do? Where do we start? None of this is kind of new. Some of it is validating and quantifying your experiences. But what do we know about the things that are driving or determining how Detroiters are rating their lives? And the important thing that we found out, it helps us to understand where do we start when we start to think about collective action and what we can do to help improve Detroiters' overall well-being and how they see their ability to live their best life possible. In order of importance, when Detroiters are rating their lives, the aspects of their experiences that are most important in determining whether or not they're thriving, struggling, or suffering are falling in one of those 3 categories: economic opportunity, jobs and work, and education. Particularly around economic opportunity is their overall perception that they have the ability to get ahead by working hard. When we think about jobs and work, it's their overall satisfaction with the availability of local jobs and their ability to receive job training and services related to being able to achieve those jobs that they want to have. And from an education perspective, it's access to high quality public schools and leveraging opportunities to achieve their career and financial goals. The second most important category to the things that are driving overall well-being and how they rate their everyday lives is the aspects around their health and well-being, particularly those access to quality healthcare, so their satisfaction with the level of access that they have to quality health care or how easy it is for them to access quality health care, as well as the satisfaction with the availability of quality health care within their community. So from a health and well-being standpoint, is if Detroiters are able to give a 5 to those questions around, I am satisfied with the overall availability of the access that I have to quality health care, or I find it easy or very easy to access quality health care. Some of that is having access to a doctor that look like me, so a doctor that shares your racial, ethnic, or background and experiences, that they're much more likely to be thriving in their overall well-being. The second category is this element of community and environment. What we see is that Detroiters who are saying, yes, they have access to social opportunities or community events, they're also more likely to say that they have strong social cohesion, whether that is having people that they can rely on in case of an emergency, but also feeling like they live in a community where people care about each other. So when you think about the order, so it's that personal, right? Do I have an ability to achieve the economic goals that I have for myself, whether that's through strong access to public school systems and education as far as job training, or feeling like I have a fighting chance, which is my perception of being able to get ahead by working hard. And then there's those physical aspects, right? So being able to access quality health care. We see that this community aspect is also very important to how Detroiters rate their overall life. And that is in relation to their satisfaction with the neighborhood conditions and neighborhood services. That this is also an important factor in how they're currently evaluating their lives. And the last bucket I want to talk about is this idea of justice. And this is satisfaction with law enforcement. As part of the national work that we do, we have 6 key research pillars where we ask questions around, these are the 6 key areas of life that when we understand people's experiences in terms of their ability to lead a life well lived, those were the 6 key research areas. Justice is a big area. This idea of relationship with law enforcement, the ability to feel safe in your physical environment. Not that this is not a key area for those living in the city, but in relation to how people were rating their current lives, this is an aspect that really only popped up for us from an analytical standpoint for those that were living in the suburb, and this idea with their overall satisfaction with law enforcement. I don't want to play down because this wasn't a significant driver of overall current life evaluation for city residents, because what we did hear from city residents, though, is that they would like to have more police presence in their neighborhood, and moving away because of high crime was the top reason city residents gave as well why they would want to move out of the city. So I do want to say, from a relational standpoint, this came up more of a driver for overall life evaluation among those living in the suburbs. One of the things that we are particularly interested in understanding is what are the differences in people's experiences across these key areas that we know are important to how they rate their lives. And so that's what you're looking at now at the screen is really some unique experiences that we were seeing across different groups on those areas that I mentioned were most important in terms of how Detroiters were rating their overall life in terms of their quality of life. A lot of these are all actually among city residents in terms of some distinctions that we see. When we think about economic jobs and work and the ability to access those opportunities to achieve your educational and your career goals, we know that work is a big part and an important part for Detroiters. So we ask people, what are those barriers that you are facing in terms of finding and keeping a job? So what we see, and this is among Detroiters who told us that they were currently employed, so we asked them what were the barriers to you finding and keeping a job. And what we saw and heard from residents is that 51% of them said having access to a car was the major barrier for them finding or keeping a job. The other big bucket was 44% of them saying access to convenient public transportation was a major barrier. So that is access to transportation that can take you to those opportunities or access to transportation that can move you around so you have more options available to you. I have on here also the level of training, and this was another big category that Detroiters cite as a barrier for them finding and keeping a job. And this 44% for the city was something that was particularly interesting, but why it's on the chart up here is that this was 42% for those that were living in the suburbs as well. And this was the only other measure that the two areas were close on. So city residents and suburban residents, both 4 in 10 were saying that having access to the level of training that's required was a major barrier for them finding and keeping a job. The other thing I'll note in addition to the slide was, what were people's experiences? We asked the question about, what was the likelihood that you would leave your job within the next 12 months? And so among those who were saying that they would think about leaving or looking elsewhere, we asked a series of questions about, what was that reason? And it was important because what we did see and was able to uncover is this unique experience that stood out for Black employees who lived in the city, that they were 1.7 times more likely to say they want to go work somewhere where they have a more positive work experience. So that's a work experience without harassment and discrimination. That's something that we found that was unique among Black employees living in the city, because this was a meaningful difference that we saw when we compared Black employees with those of other race and ethnicities in terms of why they were thinking about leaving. The other thing I want to talk about is this idea about the importance of having access to a quality education system or being satisfied with the educational system and schools in the area. We know it's an important driver when we think about the education and how that impacts people's, the way people rate their quality of life today. So what we know about Detroiters and how we compare that to the national average in the work that we're doing is that residents in the city are about 2.2 times more likely to be dissatisfied with the educational system or school in their area. And what's a particularly unique experience among those 18 to 39 is that over half of them say that they think that children would be better off going to school in another area. So when you start to think about how people are making decisions and the reasons why they would consider moving out of the city, second only to the physical safety, so wanting to move away because of high crime, this idea of wanting to move to a place that is a better place to raise your children was the second most cited reasons that people gave as to why they would want to move away. So when you start to think about over half of 18 to 39-year-olds are saying that they think children would be better off going to school elsewhere, and it being the second most cited reasons as to why people would want to move away from the city, I think that's an important dynamic as we start to think about what does collective action look like and what does solutioning looks like around addressing some of the needs of those that are living in the city. And the last thing I think it's probably not surprising to you either is that Black residents were also less likely to say they had access to those social and community aspects of life, which we know are important to building social cohesion and helping overall well-being. So what does this all mean? We also ask a question about whether or not residents would recommend their area to others, or whether it's to a friend or associate as a good place to live. What we have found in the data is that despite the challenges that Detroiters were facing, especially city residents, over half were more likely was saying that they would recommend the city as a good place to live. That's something when we see some differences across race and ethnicity, but when we also look at the region overall, we see that this is 80%. So 80% of residents within the region say that they would recommend the city as a good place to live. And I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm around living in the city. There's a lot of pride and passion. And I think when we start to think about in the power of and, what does collective action look like? So there's enthusiasm. Let's add opportunity when we think about addressing the needs for residents in terms of their ability to achieve a life well lived. Thank you all so much. Check out the data in the report.
This session, The Intersection of Business and Equity Objectives, is sponsored by Consumers Energy. Joining Camille on stage, please welcome Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Corporate Social Responsibility Officer at Bank of America, Cynthia Bowman. President and Chief Executive Officer of Bridgewater Interiors, Ron Hall. President and Chief Executive Officer of Kelly, Peter Quigley. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome Executive Advisor at Bridge Detroit and host of Detroit Today and American Black Journal, Stephen Henderson.
Okay, before we start, I just want to say, I'm a native Detroiter and someone who lives in the city now, raising my kids there. There's not another way to describe the feeling that you get watching this kind of data be presented about where you live and who you are, other than just devastation. It's not surprising, but it's a very stark look in the mirror. It's a very dark picture of what life is like in the city that I love. So really, really great presentation, but very difficult to sit through. Also want to talk to the audience just a little bit about how we're going to do this. We're going to have a conversation up here, but we're also going to take some questions from the audience. And you can participate by going to the conference app and clicking on agenda, select this forum, the intersection of business and equity objectives, select Q&A at the top of the screen and submit your question, and then it'll show up on this iPad, and I can include you in our conversation up here. So I want to start with our panelists talking just a little about what we saw and how the work that you're doing in your businesses connects with the data, connects with these problems. Is it a driver of some of these problems, or is corporate America responsible for some of what we're seeing? And the work that you're doing, how does it push back? How does it push us in a different direction? Cynthia, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's, sometimes although the data is difficult, it's important because without some discomfort, there's not growth. So I'll start with that. But thank you for having me. I guess I'll start a little bit about and take an angle from Bank of America. And, when you think about diversity and inclusion in context of the communities which we serve, I believe they go hand in hand. One of the things that we talk about at the bank is the power of and it's about driving profits and purpose. The purpose, as you heard from our CEO yesterday, is all about the work that we do to drive responsible growth that's in a sustainable way. That includes all the work that we do, not only for our employees, but in the community. I will tell you that it is absolutely driven from the top. And so we do think we as a corporation have a role in creating economic opportunity and addressing issues around racial equity in the communities we serve, but also for our own people. And that's a lot of part about my job. When I think specifically about what that means, it means it's embedded in business reviews, meaning diversity, equity, inclusion. It's in talent reviews. It's in performance management. And we hold leaders accountable. Brian's accountable to our board. It also means that we believe in both representation and inclusion, and also the outcomes that we drive in our community. Our organization is 50% women. We are 50% people of color. We look like the world we live in. And we want to look like the world we live in at every level. And that's why you see a diverse board. Our leadership team, you see Brian's leadership team is incredibly diverse. He has 8 women that directly sit on his management team. 4 of those women lead 8 lines of business. 2 of those leaders are Black African American. 2 of those leaders are Asian. 2 of those leaders are Hispanic Latino. So it's not about just talking the talk around and looking at the data. It's about walking the walk and specifically implementing and holding ourselves accountable to drive progress.
Ron?
I completely agree. Bridgewater Interiors was really born of the supplier diversity and inclusion efforts in the automotive industry. We're headquartered in Detroit, down near the Ambassador Bridge. We employ about 1,400 or 1,500 people in the Metro Detroit area between our Detroit and Warren facilities. And from day one, it's been a part of the company's DNA to have strong representation at all ranks of the company, to demonstrate that you could employ an inner city workforce at the highest levels of manufacturing performance and deliver results to shareholders and stakeholders. We were talking a little bit backstage about the importance of leadership in driving these efforts and how if you have that, It really is possible. We have, very similar numbers. Our senior leader team is extremely diverse, women, racial minority persons. We are strong. We lean in on corporate DE&I efforts. We're in a joint venture with Adient, large publicly traded firm. And frankly, I think, are able to lead the way inside the enterprise to help demonstrate how some of these things can be done. Economic opportunity and greater economic equity is, the last bastion of the civil rights movement. I was, raised with that ideal. The company is based on those ideals, and we're really proud of the fact that we provide a lot of, solid middle-class jobs with great benefits and tuition reimbursement and all these other things for our employees. I'm especially proud of the fact, as we talk about, providing equity and pathways up, that more than 40% of my management team is comprised of former hourly team members. And we're completely unionized in our Michigan facilities. And so, these things are possible when you talk about the power of and. You can be union and deliver great results. You can be union and have great labor management relations. You can perform at the highest levels in a very technical space within the industry, even though it hasn't been done in some of these areas where people haven't had access to these jobs before.
Camille, I'm going to come back to you, but Peter.
Yeah, thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's great to be on this panel. I think it's appropriate for me to maybe just call out the Chamber for having me on this panel, this being a Gallup presentation on Black voices, and in particular Black voices in Detroit. When it comes to voices, mine is not black. I hear one of my kids telling me, "Thank you, Captain Obvious." But I think it's really important, and if there's anything that speaks to the power of and, I believe deeply that people who look like me and have position like me need to not only be part of this conversation, but to be held accountable for the outcomes. And I implore those of you who are not invested in this conversation to become invested in this conversation, because it's not only important for Detroit, it's important for the region, it's important for the country, so we all have a stake. And getting back to the question about how business and this important issue intersects, Kelly is a big company. We have thousands of employees. We operate in almost every state in the country. We work with for-profit companies, not-for-profit companies, governments. We're the largest provider of substitute teachers in the U.S. So we have broad exposure. And I can tell you unequivocally that the best performing companies that we deal with, more than 10,000, are those that have embraced the idea that opening up opportunity for more people is good business. It's the right thing to do, of course, but it's also good business. And we see time and time again the best performing across sectors among the companies we serve are those companies that, like B of A, has adopted a deliberate, disciplined, data-driven approach to DEI that they measure and produces outcomes that support the idea that selling to the communities that we all serve, being representative of that in your employee base is a good start. So that's clear. But this is not Diversity 101 pablum. We have done our own research to correlate with what Gallup has done. We talked to 1,500 C-level executives, 5,000 of their employees, and we released this in May. It's called Rework. We've done it for a number of years, but we released the most recent version in May. You can find it on our website, costplusdrugs.com. That's not.
It was a different panel.
That's the other billionaire. kellyservices.com. But it establishes very clearly the correlation between the best financial performing companies are those that embrace not only diversity from a representation standpoint, but equity and inclusion in the workforce. So it is unequivocal, and I encourage any company, business owner, organization that has not gotten the message, happy to talk to you about all of the body of work that goes into what I just talked about.
Yeah. Camille, I want to have you draw a few connections for us. One between the drivers of the data that we see, and then connecting that to the solutions to the things that we see. I think there's a continuum that I think we have to acknowledge up here, which is that corporate America, our economic system, is part of what creates the data that we see in places like Detroit. At the same time, the reason we're having this conversation is because corporate interests have tremendous opportunity to change that. But I want to have you just kind of talk about how those things interconnect across that divide.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we see in the data is this ability, the perception of being able to get ahead by working hard. I think what could be discouraging is more than just like, I want a job, right? But you start to think about, well, what does a good job look like for me? It's an opportunity to go somewhere to work where I feel like I can contribute meaningfully to the organization's mission, but that I can do so being who I am or showing up how I want to show up, and that I have a fighting chance in terms of my ability to leverage opportunities within those organizations. So one of the things is saying, when we look at some of the data as to why Detroiters say that they would look to leave their employers, I think next to higher salary, that was number one, but also better benefits. The other thing was this idea of being able to leverage opportunity. And so when you start to think about creating equitable systems within organizations and letting individuals who work for you feel like they have an ability, like anyone else in the organization, to leverage those opportunities, I think that's really what you're hearing and what we see in some of the national data around what workers' experiences are like and how confident they feel in their ability to achieve their career goals at the organizations that they currently work. And you're saying those who are able to give that a 5 are significantly more likely to say that they had no intention to leave their organization within the next year. So when you start to think about, well, why is that important? With the war for talent and thinking about, creating environments where employees want to work and where they feel like they can achieve their career goals is very much important to organizations and businesses' bottom line, as well as creating conditions for workers to feel like, they can achieve their life goals, right? And achieve equitable life outcomes by working here. So I do think that there's a strong connection related to what people are saying that they want and expect from their employers.
Yeah. I want to have our panelists each talk about outcome and how you measure outcome outside of your company first. But what tells you that the things that you're doing are making a difference? What tells you that the things that you're doing are correcting some of the data that we saw in the report? Ron, I'll start with you this time.
I think anecdotal feedback is really important. We're a small enough company that it's important to me when I interact with employees walking around, our 4 facilities. There are 2, as I said, in Metro Detroit, 1 outstate, and then 1 in the Southeast. I learn a lot, every time I walk the production floor, as people will approach me and just share a little bit about what their day-to-day experiences are at the company, what's working for them, what's not. And we absolutely, go back to the HR team and talk about, how can we make this a little better in this way or that way? You can't do a whole lot. Manufacturing is what it is, particularly for a just-in-time manufacturer like us that's, producing at pace and online with the automaker assembly plant that we're supplying. But you have to try to keep people engaged, I think, by responding to the things that matter to them. So, for example, we years ago began allocating a portion of our discretionary budget for employee teams to decide how we would support the communities, right? We want to support the organizations that you're involved in away from work. We want to support the organizations that are important to you. Here's the mission of our community relations team. What do you think of that? You know, we donate a lot of money for education causes because that really resonates with employees, for example. Like, how can we do some things beyond, you know, being able to raise wages, which, you know, are never as high as any of us want. I tell people all the time, I'd love to be able to pay everybody $35 an hour to put car seats together, but that's not the way the business model works. And I don't want to apologize for what the business model is. This is where we are. And so how do we make this workable so that you want to come here every day and do a great job, and that you leave here knowing that your contributions mattered? A lot of it's just that at the margin employee engagement stuff.
So your business is in a community. It's in a pretty tight-knit community in the city of Detroit. Talk about how this plays out in the relationship between the business and the folks who live near you.
Well, I want to say this carefully because I know Frank Venegas is in the audience.
I was going to say,
he's
Frank's
the
here
mayor of
somewhere,
Southwest
right?
Detroit for sure. And hey, we have learned a lot following Ideal Group's, you know, example. I mean, I think they have been, you know, the corporate leaders of that side of town. And when, you know, they call and say, hey, we're going to sign up to support this or support that, and we want the business community to rally, we always rally to what they're doing. And there are a few other firms like that. And we like to think, you know, there's some things that we lead on and support, you know, that other business community members will come and support. Again, it seems to work. You know, we have a lot of employees who live near the plants, both plants, in the area, and really seem to care about the fact that, you know, we support the community efforts surrounding the plants. And, you know, we show up at the meetings and we care about the public safety stuff, and we, you know, we keep all the little things that just require attention from leadership that will communicate to people in ways large and small. Hey, we see what you're dealing with. We see a way to make, you know, your world working for us a little bit better, so we're trying. And Warren, I'll use an example. We had, you know, an auto theft problem out there, as did other businesses out near Van Dyke and 696. And we put up fencing around the property and automatic gates and brought in a level of security that we hadn't had to have in 15 years. But it's one of the things that kind of changed for us post-COVID, was that part of the landscape. And it was important to me that the employees see us respond to that, you know, fairly immediately. You know, that's an investment, but I think those are the ways, you know, you communicate to people that, again, hey, what you do here matters. And, you know, we care about everything that's going on with you, not only about the output going out the doors.
Yeah. Peter, external outcomes that tell you that what you're doing is working.
Yeah, so thank you. Kelly's in a slightly unique position because we have more than 7,000 full-time employees, but we also put about 350,000 people to work, and about 50 to 60,000 people find permanent work through Kelly. So we have a very broad touch point to the labor community. Camille mentioned the importance of DE&I in the workplace. One of the things I'm very passionate about, Kelly's very passionate about, is creating more access to meaningful work. So I want to get more people to the workplace so we can create a more equitable path. In 2020, we announced something called Equity at Work, which is a program designed to shed a spotlight on barriers to preventing more people from finding access to work. And I think the results today indicate that work is an important component, economic opportunity, jobs and work is an important component of the success of a city, of a region, and again, of a country. So Equity at Work focuses on things like requiring a 4-year degree when some other credential, a bachelor's degree, military service would qualify, automatically disqualifying one of the 75 million Americans that have some blemish on their criminal record, having drug requirements or drug screening requirements that eliminate automatically 30%. That's all good, but the connection to what we're talking about today is a lot of the people who are most impacted by those barriers are people of color. It's just a simple mathematical truth. So when companies close the top of the funnel because of one of those reasons, they're preventing more people of color to have the opportunity to work. And regardless of political affiliation, I think we can all agree that a job is good for a person, their family, the community, the country, the economy. So we were and have been very pleased with the results for that. But getting back to the question about measurement, we didn't really have a way to measure it. My team came up with a way using technology to measure the impact that we are having on individuals who are facing some kind of barrier. And while it's early, it's 3 months of data, there were more than 1,000 individuals that found work that had one of these barriers existed prior, they would not have found work. 1,000 individuals working, more than 1,000, working with more than 25 companies. Now, that's 3 months. If you think about if that was 250 companies or 2,500 companies, what a difference we could make to creating access to work. So then we can be talking about, okay, then how do we create mobility with work? How do we address some of these other issues at work? But I'm very pleased with the results. And by the way, for those of you who are employers, of that population, the turnover rate is 4.5%. 4.5%, because they're appreciative, they're loyal, and our ability to fill those jobs has gone up considerably, again, because we don't have to fight with the barrier.
Cynthia?
Just really building off of what Camille said, because I think she made a really important point. One of the things that you'll see in our annual report, it shows our employee engagement, and it's going to show you a trend line that looks like this. The D&I index is the same way. That's how we measure inclusion. There's a lot of debate on how you measure inclusion. I would say pick a term and measure it. Because the opposite of not feeling included is excluded, which means you don't belong. I mean, and so we sometimes get lost in semantics. It's important we're really clear, because it's 2 elements. One element is, can people bring their whole selves to work, and do they have equal access to opportunity regardless of difference? What you also see on that same trend line of engagement and D&I going up is turnover that goes down. So you want to attract an incredibly diverse workforce that wants to work there, and they will give back to the community, and we see that in our numbers. So that's number one. And how do we do that? By creating a culture of inclusion. Again, we measure it. So every employee, every manager across the bank has their own inclusion index and their D&I index. You heard from our CEO yesterday that said it's embedded in talent planning. So you just can't perform. You have to drive an inclusive environment. And we define what that means at the company, and we measure it. And then we hold leaders accountable. The other element that was also being discussed was, well, what do we do in the community? And we do a lot. I'll give you some examples. So one of our commitments was around $1.25 billion around economic opportunity. We measure the impact. So it's just not about making a statement. It's about devoting those dollars in the community. They're around things like workforce development. We have been hiring. We hired 10,000 people from low to moderate income without college degrees. We double down in hiring another 10,000. It's around entrepreneurship. The work we're doing, particularly as the pandemic that impacted Black and brown entrepreneurs specifically, we've been doubling down with financial investments and support. It's about addressing things like health equity, another commitment, because the impact, particularly in Black and brown communities from the pandemic, were disproportionately impacted in certain groups. So we went into specific certain communities, and through the help of the market, have been deliberately distributing funds and dollars to help address inequities around health. And then the last area is housing. We have a $15 billion commitment. It's all devoted about providing grants and to provide more ownership, which we know is access to equity, particularly in communities that have not had that same access. So my follow-up is, we have to be true to data and facts and not just talk about these commitments, but show what we're specifically doing to move the needle.
We do have a number of audience questions, and I think this one is a really great one. It says, the top barrier for Detroiters accessing work is lack of transportation. What can businesses and employers do to address this challenge? And the reason I think that's a great question is because as the data shows in the survey, this is a really complex set of issues that all tie themselves up together in the knots to hold people back from opportunity. It may not be obvious to a lot of employers that transportation is something they need to be focused on to give people opportunity to get to work. It's not a traditional role necessarily of companies, but it matters in places like Detroit. So I wonder what you make of that suggestion. I'll start with you this time, Peter.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of experience in Detroit with respect to solving that problem, but working with other companies who have high concentrations of potential employees in a environment and a commuting requirement where there's not mass transportation, we have worked with them to create private, busing solutions that have a regular cadence of transportation that runs through the day. It pays for itself when you think about the cost of production lines not being open or the cost of turnover or people absenteeism. We also have had some clients that have gotten very creative with including either an Uber or a Lyft ride as part of compensation or as part of the package so that individuals can take advantage of that. If it's available, it's not available everywhere, but if it's available so they can get to work without having to worry about whatever the cost is, and the employer builds that into the economic equation. And while I wouldn't say that's widespread, people are thinking about this issue. And again, I don't have a solution for Detroit per se, but I think there's opportunity to come up with creative solutions in the right situation.
Yeah.
I'd like to elevate maybe the question just a little bit around a full suite of benefits. And I do think that this is really important. We do have commuter compensation benefits. We actually doubled down on a lot of that during the pandemic to help individuals, particularly those in critical roles that had to go in and weren't able to work from home at the time. But it's all types of benefits. I mean, when we look at our parental support, it's raising our minimum wage. We're now at $22. We've committed to $25 by 2025. It's about not raising medical premiums for our employees, particularly those who make under a certain amount of money. It's about creating jobs so every employee at the bank is living and has a sustainable wage and not having to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. We focus on wellness and emotional support, financial support. I mean, I will tell you that the benefits across this company are top notch, and we double down on many of those even during the most critical times of the last several years. Why? Because you want people coming in and living and being able to work a true sustainable job at your company. And so we have to really think about this whole suite of benefits and how you support your employees as a component of being a great place to work.
Ron?
I agree with all that, and I'm sitting here, envying companies the size of B of A. Because in my world, as an auto supplier, we have talked about some of these issues. Local businesses have talked about maybe we want to put together a private transportation service. Because for sure, transportation and childcare are the 2 biggest barriers that people who work for us and people who want to work for us have to coming to work or joining our workforce. Generally, the feedback we get is the pay is okay, the benefits are great, but man, transportation and childcare are the barriers for me. And so we are aware of it. There have been off and on conversations with various coalitions of business groups to try to address some of that. So I'll own it a little and say I have not been smart enough to yet figure out how to make the cost part of the model work. The state has come up with a program where they'll pay, a third of childcare fees in certain instances. Well, $3,500, per child, when I've got separate collective bargaining agreements at each facility is, a lot to navigate in, the low margin world of automotive, commoditized space. And so I think that, and I've seen this with larger efforts in the industry, when the OEs say, okay, this needs to happen, when General Motors or Ford or Stellantis or whomever says, we want to see this happen for our employees, and we expect suppliers to adopt these approaches as well. And yes, we understand we'll have to make some room in the purchase order for that. That's when it'll happen.
Yeah.
True.
I would say to the transit question in particular, one thing that I think could be really powerful is the voice that you guys have and the influence that you can have over the public process, right? What are we all doing up here? This is where we bring business and government and philanthropic leaders together, supposedly to solve our problems. You have tremendous access to the people who make decisions about public transit in our region and our state. Of course, it is abhorrent in the city of Detroit. You have a lot more opportunity than a lot of people to be able to make the case for that being better. Last question. Someone was moved by Peter's comments about white leadership on this issue. They wonder how we get more people to have the courage to do that. That does take some courage for white folks to say, look, this is our problem as much as anybody else's. It doesn't happen all the time. So I wonder what each of you think we can do to, again, encourage more people to be in this space. Cynthia?
There was a piece in LinkedIn that I wrote around sort of after George Floyd, and it was around what do we tell our children. And at the time, it was because my son, I have 4 children, 2 of them are boys, two females, but my son at the time, when we were living in New York, told me he was afraid to walk to summer camp. And that was because he was seeing what was going on in the world. That was the Pulse nightclub shooting years that impacted LGBTQ+, plus the Hispanic community. I think that was Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. There were the police officers, but he was seeing sort of this loss of life. And then I think he started to see him as a black man in society. And the whole piece was around we each have a role. We can look to corporations, all these leaders are doing their part, but what are we each doing individually within our own circle of influence? And the question is, if we either think that there's truly inclusive environments for all or not, but silence, I think Dr. Martin Luther King was the one who said, I not only hear the words of my enemies, but the silence of my friends. And I think it's really important to understand that in this moment, particularly it's super polarized, I understand that. But we each have a voice, we each have a responsibility, we each have a cause, and we could do our part to truly create inclusion for all if we believe that that doesn't exist. So I think it starts with each one of us in the room, understanding what our role is.
I'd like to lift up especially the importance of professional allyship. We were talking about this a little bit backstage. So, Bridgewater is, a $2 billion a year company that would not exist if John Barth hadn't decided, 25 years ago, this is important and I'm going to lean into this space. If Harold Kuttner, who was leading General Motors purchasing at the time, another white guy, hadn't decided, this is important, this is the right thing to do, this is ultimately good for the business, I'm going to lean into this space. And they, created a company that has been a part of a broader movement that has created, I should know the numbers, I'm sorry, I don't, but thousands and thousands of jobs and millions and probably hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation for black and brown people and higher levels of participation for them in one of the most important, maybe the most important manufacturing industry driving the national economy. Would not happen without allyship. Yes, people like, my father and my colleagues and me today, have to step through the door and have to make the most of the opportunity, but you've got to get the opportunity because somebody who was in power decided, that's important. And it's still important. I'm at all levels. I see it all the time in my career. Again, we were talking about this a little bit backstage. Allyship is important. Certainly everybody in this room can do something, and more than you do now. It's not enough that you're not a racist. How are you helping to make society more inclusive?
Camille, I think the question to you is how do we elevate the exposure to this data? How do we get this to the people who need to hear it, need to see it, and then need to act on it?
Yeah, so Stephen, I love the question. I'll say this. Contemplation is a luxury and a privilege, and I think if we all can acknowledge that, the ability to contemplate, am I courageous enough? Do I have the ability to, is a luxury because when you think about work around equity, if you're in a position to do that, it means you're not the one that is feeling the brunt of the inequities that exist in our society. So I would say that contemplation is a luxury, but I'll also say it's democratizing expertise. And then that's why we think about the data that we are collecting and the work that we're doing to amplifying resident voices or amplifying those who are having those experiences into these conversations, I think is a way to do that in the exposure. Because oftentimes we'll all come here and all of the experts and the policy heads and the leaders will talk about it. How can we center resident voices into these conversations, I think is a way to kind of elevate people's experiences into decision making.
Yeah.
I'll be very brief. I would say, there was a time where the answer would be you can't tolerate any behavior that supports anything that's going to disadvantage anybody unfairly. That's clearly not enough. There was a time when treating everybody equally, and I will tell you that was for a long time. I thought that's, blind justice, that was me, treat everybody equally, and I've done my part. But what I've learned in the seasoned years of my career is that is not enough. This has to be active participation. You have to work diligently and thoughtfully and deliberately to radically change the way and the narrative that we've lived with for too long. And that requires, again, everybody, including people that look like me, to raise their voices, get in the ring with us, and we'll advance. And next year or the year after, the results will show, I'm sure.
We'll be there to measure it.
Yeah, there's a. One of the things I think to the point we have to address is this theory of like a zero-sum game and as it relates to diversity and inclusion. Yeah. This belief of more for someone means less for me. And you were starting to sort of say there's all kinds of studies that have told us for years that actually it should grow the pie. But why we keep coming back to that gets in the way, I think, of why sometimes there's a belief in acting or how it's perceived. There was a quote that said, equity for all doesn't mean less for you, it's not pie. And I like to think about that because I think we have to start challenging these fundamental beliefs and assumptions that are deeply held that get in our way of truly driving the work that needs to be done and creating a more inclusive environment for all.
Yeah. So great way to end this conversation. I want to thank our panelists and, of course, thank the audience for your great